Chapter 1098. For the first time in his life, Gu Xingyun felt a bone-piercing chill. For the first time, he found that the wind and sunlight could be so cold, and that the light could be so pale. A slight wind blew in the village, and the sun shone down from the sky. The wind, rain, and sunlight were warm at first, but the longer they stayed here, the colder they became. It was indescribable gloom and coldness. Little by little, it pierced through the skin, froze the blood, and froze the soul. He felt that his body was dying little by little, and his vitality began to decay, become pale, and become dead. He became perfectly integrated with the village in front of him. Who is Jiang Shangyu? In a trance, Gu Xingyun suddenly began to think about this question, and quickly came up with a vague answer. The vague answer could not be said to be Gu Xingyun's mistake, but it could also be said to be his biggest mistake. He did pay attention to Jiang Shangyu. Whether it was the special status of the Jiang family or Jiang Shangyu himself, they were worthy of Gu Xingyun's attention. He wanted to draw the Jiang family into the special warfare group, and draw Jiang Shangyu into the special warfare group. Jiang Shangyu was undoubtedly a very outstanding young man, and he could even be said to be a very outstanding one. Gu Xingyun attached great importance to him. In order to completely tie Jiang Shangyu to Kunlun City, he even thought about marrying his daughter Li Qingqing to him. But it was also undeniable that he did not absolutely attach importance to Jiang Shangyu. He was easy to talk to, easy to get along with, ambitious to a certain extent, controllable, non-threatening, low-key, and calm. In the eyes of everyone, including Gu Xingyun, Jiang Shangyu was roughly such an image. It was not until now that Gu Xingyun suddenly realized that Jiang Shangyu, who was hiding behind that image, did not reveal not only his strength, but this village might be his biggest secret. His brain was a little chaotic, but the fear in his heart was gradually dissipating. With his willpower, he naturally could not be frightened to collapse. What he experienced today might be a little weird, but Gu Xingyun could be sure that in the current situation of himself, Jiang Shangyu, and Li Guangtu, this cooperation was beneficial to both sides. At least for the time being, Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu still needed to use their status to place their forces in various positions in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, and they had no reason to harm him. Gu Xingyun calmed down a little, and looked at the small village in front of him. The village seemed to be quite old. The houses looked very old, and the internal layout seemed to be filled with the limitations of the times. The streets were very narrow, so it looked especially gloomy. White lanterns were hung on the doors of every house in the village, fluttering in the wind. The blood-red happiness character swayed slightly, and the whole village was filled with a very strange jubilation. Gu Xingyun seemed to be standing in the middle of the street, where he could see the outline of the village to the greatest extent. The street was very narrow, but extremely clean. It was obvious that someone had just cleaned it not long ago. However, standing in the village, Gu Xingyun did not feel any signs of activity. A deathly silence spread throughout the village. Under the sunlight, there were no signs of activity in the village. It looked like a mountain village that had been abandoned for a long time. Gu Xingyun felt that something was wrong, but he still couldn't tell what was wrong. He walked quietly on the street and soon walked through the whole village. The village was not big, with only about 200 households. But there was no one in the entire village. All the doors of the households were closed. In the absolute silence, even the sound of the wind seemed to have disappeared. Gu Xingyun slowed down his breathing and returned to the position where he had stood at the beginning. In front of him was a relatively large house. The pale lantern swayed in the wind, the dark wooden door, and the quiet atmosphere. The scene in front of him seemed to be indescribably cold. Gu Xingyun hesitated, and finally took 2 steps forward. He pulled the black metal ring on the wooden door, and slapped it on the door. He slapped it. The sound of slapping was extremely harsh in the quiet environment, and it went far away from the deep street. Gu Xingyun's face became a little pale again. As an expert of the invincible realm, the willpower would not frighten him to the point of collapse, but everything he had experienced today was challenging his psychological endurance. His domain had shrunk to the extreme, and his body was completely tense, as if he was worried that something would suddenly rush out from behind the door. Gu Xingyun was now in a state of battle. There was no sound at the door, and no one came to open the door. Gu Xingyun hesitated and increased the sound of slapping again. The sound of slapping the door went farther on the street, and it sounded a little noisy. But the door was still silent. Even the nearby residents didn't make any sound. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth and put his palm on the door. After hesitating for a few seconds, his palm slightly exerted force. Bang! The wooden latch that locked the door was broken by the force. The black door opened a gap to the inside. A cold airflow came to his face. Gu Xingyun's body shook subconsciously. He looked around, and there was no change around, but the cold doorway inside the door was dark. Gu Xingyun always felt that there was a pair of blood-red eyes at the door, staring at him. Phew phew. Gu Xingyun took a few deep breaths, gritted his teeth, and pushed the door open a little again. The creaking sound was so clear that it was almost torturous. The pair of eyes at the door didn't appear, and there was only some dry firewood in the doorway. Gu Xingyun gritted his teeth and walked in. He had completely concentrated his attention, ready to face any unexpected situation at any time. But nothing happened. After walking out of the doorway, there was a simple courtyard. The wall facing the doorway was painted with an extremely oppressive black giant tree. A black cat was quietly lying on the wall, and a pair of eyes with contracted pupils were staring at Gu Xingyun silently. Gu Xingyun stopped. The black cat stared at him silently. A man and a cat confronted each other for about half a minute. Gu Xingyun, whose body was tense, slowly took a step forward. The black cat didn't move. He moved forward again. The black cat still didn't move. Until Gu Xingyun walked to the black cat. The black cat kept lying on the ground, looking at the front silently. Gu Xingyun squatted down carefully, tentatively stretched out his hand, and put it on the black cat's body. The black cat was very hard, but its fur was extremely soft. It seemed to be a sculpture so realistic that even Gu Xingyun couldn't tell whether it was real or fake when he observed it closely. A sculpture with the skin of a real cat. Gu Xingyun suddenly thought of the human skin that looked like a map. He felt disgusted, stood up quickly and walked to the front hall. He knocked on the door of the front hall as well. There was no response. Gu Xingyun hesitated, carefully pushed the door open and walked in. The dark room avoided the sunlight to the greatest extent. The room was a little damp, with a touch of moldy smell that seemed to have been left for a long time. Is anyone at home? Gu Xingyun stood in the front hall and shouted with a voice loud enough for the whole courtyard to hear. His voice seemed to be magnified countless times in an instant, and the huge sound waves made his heart skip a beat. But in the next second, his huge sound waves seemed to be swallowed up in an instant, and the loud sound instantly became softer, and then louder again. The transmission of the sound seemed to become completely chaotic, without any rules. The word ask was like thunder, but the voice of the latter few words was so low that even Gu Xingyun himself didn't hear it clearly. When it came to the last two words, the voice suddenly became louder. When Gu Xingyun's question appeared in his own ears, it became an inexplicable sentence. Is it home? Gu Xingyun clenched his fists and waited for a long time, but he didn't get any response. There was dead silence in the courtyard, without any vitality. Gu Xingyun walked slowly to the bedroom. His palm fell on the doorknob. Finally, he clenched his teeth and pushed the door open. The sound of the door hitting was dull and hoarse. Gu Xingyun stared at the bed in the bedroom. After entering the village, he finally saw people for the first time. Two figures were lying quietly on the bed, covered with quilts, and had no reaction to Gu Xingyun's sudden appearance. Gu Xingyun breathed heavily and walked into the bedroom regardless. He finally saw the scene on the bed clearly. There were not two people. There seemed to be a young couple on the bed. Their appearances were very ordinary. Between them, there was a little girl about 6 or 7 years old sleeping. The girl's palm clutched the quilt tightly, and the smile on the corner of her mouth was strangely sweet. The couple was lying on the bed, with their eyes closed. No breathing, no heartbeat. But their posture was too peaceful and leisurely. Gu Xingyun couldn't even be sure whether they were dead bodies or ordinary people who were sleeping soundly. Gu Xingyun walked to the window, slowly stretched out his hand, and carefully put it on the young man's forehead. During the whole process, he was staring at the young man. As long as the young man made any movement, he would react immediately. But the young man didn't move from beginning to end. He just lay there and slept quietly. His palm was on the young man's forehead, with a little warmth. There was body temperature, but there was no heartbeat or breathing. Gu Xingyun's own breathing seemed to start to become difficult. This time, he was finally sure that the family of 3 on the bed, they were all dead people. They were all corpses. And they were corpses that had just died. He thought of the strange silence in the village. Could it be that the whole village, every house, was filled with corpses that had just died? Or, Gu Xingyan was a little confused, and his palm subconsciously exerted force. Crack! There was a slight sound like plastic inside the head of the young man's corpse. For no reason, Gu Xingyan thought of the black cat at the door. Or it was not 3 corpses in front of him, but 3 puppets that could be mistaken for real? Dummies. Gu Xingyan breathed a sigh of relief, but his spirit suddenly tightened in an instant. People, maybe they were fake, but their skins were all real. Gu Xingyan could be sure of this. Placed in front of him were pieces of incomparably complete human skin. No matter what was under the human skin, what was in front of him was human skin. It was genuine human skin. Gu Xingyan gritted his teeth and slowly loosened his palm. Meow. The moment his palm loosened, an extremely shrill cat's cry suddenly rang in Gu Xingyan's ears. A slight weight fell on Gu Xingyun's shoulder. Gu Xingyun, who was completely focused on the front, was shocked and subconsciously looked back. The black cat he saw at the door seemed to have come alive in an instant. It lay on his shoulder and stared into his eyes. Meow. His scalp was numb. A cold chill completely broke all the defenses in Gu Xingyun's heart. Hee hee. A clear laughter suddenly sounded in the bedroom. The quilt on the bed moved slightly. The little girl, who had been lying between the husband and wife without any breath or heartbeat, slowly sat up. She opened her dark eyes without any white, looked at Gu Xingyun quietly, and smiled sweetly. Dad, where's my dog? Chapter 1099. A clear and even sweet voice and a shrill cat's cry rang out at the same time. No words could describe the feeling at this moment. The numbness passed directly from the top of his head to the soles of his feet. His heartbeat accelerated wildly, and panic spread uncontrollably. Gu Xingyan realized how concentrated he was. The 3 dolls in the bedroom seemed to have unconsciously attracted all his attention, and put his spirit in a state of extreme concentration. When this state was suddenly broken in an extremely frightening way, Gu Xingyun's reaction was no different from that of ordinary people. His blood pressure soared rapidly. It was completely subconscious instinct. Gu Xingyun shook his arms frantically, trying to get rid of the black cat that silently fell on his shoulder. The clear sound was silent for a moment. As Gu Xingyan shook his arms almost in a struggle, the cat's cry that made people panic suddenly rang out. Meow, meow, meow. It was shrill, miserable, and gloomy. The cat's cry kept ringing, and the black cat grabbed Gu Xingyun's clothes tightly. Its claws even penetrated the clothes and clasped Gu Xingyun's shoulders desperately. No matter how violently Gu Xingyan shook his arms, even if he broke out his own domain, the black cat stayed firmly on his shoulder, but the cat's cry became more and more shrill and miserable. Gu Xingyun's heart seemed to have completely collapsed. Even in the face of Li Tianlan, even though he knew that he was no match for him, he still dared to fight against that young guy. He no longer cared about the dignity of the war god of the state. He suddenly turned around, shook his arms, and strode out of the bedroom. The high-pitched and shrill cat's cry spread from the bedroom to the front hall, to the courtyard, and even throughout the village. Gu Xingyan rushed directly to the door. The uneasiness in his heart was almost tangible. The strange feeling brought to him by this dead village was even more serious than that in the forest. In contrast, he would rather go back to the forest to face that human skin than stay here for a minute or a second. The wooden door was knocked open by him. The moment he stepped out of the door, his shoulder was slightly lighter. The black cat that had been grabbing onto his shoulder leapt up lightly and jumped down from his shoulder. It lay at the door, staring at Gu Xingyan with its gradually blood-red eyes, but it did not go out. Gu Xingyan did not feel relieved at all. Standing outside the door, a chill that almost froze him completely seemed to have swallowed all of his consciousness. The village, the streets. The street was still the same street that he was not familiar with, but it was not unfamiliar either. It looked the same, but it had changed a lot. The same clean, narrow road. The same squat house, a pale white lantern swaying in the wind. What was different was the people. Human? Human. Yes, people. The previously quiet and empty street was now filled with swaying silhouettes. Only then did Gu Xingyun realize that the sky on the horizon had completely darkened. The pale and somewhat chilly sunlight disappeared. Night fell. It seemed to be a clear dividing line. When the night shrouded the village, the whole village came to life. Creak! The sound of the door being pulled open rang out. The doors of the houses on the street were pulled open one by one, and people walked out of their homes with all kinds of expressions and emotions. After entering the village, Gu Xingyun heard a sound for the first time. "Aunt, I'll go to school tomorrow." A very young villager walked to the side of a middle-aged woman and said with a bright smile. The middle-aged woman nodded and sighed. "Old Lu's son. I don't know what kind of girl he's looking for. I want to eat fried paste noodles." The young man scratched his head. The woman glanced at him. My husband is going to hunt in the mountains tomorrow. There seems to be a wild boar in the mountains." The young man scratched his head. "I still don't want to marry him. I heard that he is ready to propose, but his family is not easy to get along with." The woman sighed. "I'm going to the construction site tomorrow. I don't know if it's easy to buy a ticket. I can afford 5 million yuan." The young man smiled. "But is it your first time?" The voices around began to increase. The villagers gradually became energetic. Everyone saw that their close neighbors were greeting each other. "Second sister-in-law, is your son in the city? I don't know what to eat. Alas. I'm going to be late tomorrow. I don't know if my salary will be deducted. I'm going to be late tomorrow. I don't know if my salary will be deducted. I heard that the old man of the Lu family died. This dress looks so festive and young." Gu Xingyun looked at this scene in a daze. In more than 50 years of life, he seemed to feel the madness and malice from the whole world for the first time. His spirit gradually became dull, and he just looked at these people in front of him silently. These people were indeed human beings, but everyone's spirit seemed to have become completely chaotic, and even produced a variety of different personalities. Their conversation was in full swing, and it looked very lively, but the words that came out of their mouths were completely incongruous. However, it was obvious that they didn't realize this at all, and continued to talk, as if they were programmed to talk until the end of time. No one noticed Gu Xingyun. It was as if his existence did not exist at all. Gu Xingyun's face was pale. Looking at the increasingly lively street in front of him, he was covered with cold sweat. He was really a little scared. He didn't want to stay here for a second in this crazy and chaotic village. Thus, he quietly walked into the crowd of villagers. Being in close contact with these villagers, his hands and feet were cold, and he carefully moved in the direction in his memory. He walked very slowly, but his destination was very clear. Obviously, he didn't lose his way. He wanted to go back to the forest, cross the forest, and return to Nanyan and Yuzhou. Even the ice and snow of Kunlun City at the foot of Mount Qingyan were much warmer than here. He didn't know where this place was, but he knew very well that only the place outside this damn place was the real human world. The street gradually came to an end. Thus, Gu Xingyun naturally entered an extremely narrow alley. Gu Xingyun couldn't help swallowing. He remembered very clearly that the small alley around him didn't exist at all not long ago. At the end of the street, he should see the forest. But now the forest was gone. The moment Gu Xingyun turned around, the street disappeared. The place where he came in had become a wall. All the bustling and noisy sounds outside the street disappeared instantly. The whole village seemed to become dead silent again. The back road completely disappeared. Forward became the only way. There were no street lights in the village. It was dead silent and dark. Gu Xingyun's breathing became more and more rapid. He walked forward carefully. Maybe after a minute or 5 minutes, his eyes finally adapted to the darkness around him. The visibility in front of him was still extremely low, but vaguely he seemed to see a person standing at the end of the alley. Maybe it was standing, or maybe it wasn't. It seemed to be a woman. Her long hair completely covered her face, and it was unscrupulously draped in front of her. In the night, her red dress seemed to be glowing with a blood-like mournful luster. Her body was bent forward, and her body was twisted into a strange angle. She stretched out her hands, and was moving towards Gu Xingyan little by little. There was no way back. In the absolutely dark and quiet alley, Gu Xingyan was walking face to face with the thing at the end of the alley. He couldn't see the face behind the long hair, but he instinctively felt that the other party's eyes were staring at him coldly. Deep breath, relax. Deep breath, relax. Gu Xingyan kept adjusting his breathing, but his steps were getting slower and slower as if they were filled with lead. It seemed to be aware of his speed. The distorted red figure at the end of the alley suddenly began to accelerate. Its body became more and more distorted, and its long arms rushed directly to Gu Xingyan. Fuck! Gu Xingyan, whose heart was about to collapse, roared directly. The domain that was condensed to the extreme suddenly exploded around him. The turbulent power surged wildly, and his body rushed directly to the red shadow. Fight! He could only fight. This was the only choice. The domain was vast and mighty. Gu Xingyan appeared directly at the position of the red shadow. Eoled was darkness and dead silence. The night was so dense that it seemed eternal. But the red shadow suddenly disappeared. Everything that had just happened seemed to be an illusion. It was as if that figure had never existed. Tick-tick. The ticking sound, which was close at hand, came from behind Gu Xingyan. The sound was light, but it was deafening. The strong smell of blood continued to spread. It was blood. To be exact, it was the sound of blood falling on the ground. Gu Xingyan thought of the red shadow that disappeared. The other party didn't disappear. It behind me. Gu Xingyan suddenly turned around. It was still dark. There was no twisted red shadow. However, the faintly discernible smell of blood in the surroundings continued to spread. Tick, tick. The sound of blood dripping sounded from behind Gu Xingyan again. Gu Xingyan turned around again at a faster speed. Tick, tick. The sound of blood dripping was still behind him. The smell of blood was getting stronger. Gu Xingyan stood where he was. He slowly lowered his head and looked at his feet. The sticky blood had covered the road under his feet, and it was extremely sticky. The sound of dripping became clearer, and drops of blood seemed to fall on Gu Xingyan's body. He was a little dizzy. He was in a trance. Gu Xingyan shook his head hard. He knew that the thing was closely behind him, and it was even about to stick to him. But every time he turned around, the other party seemed to appear behind him. He couldn't see it. As if he could never see it. Gu Xingyan tried to take a step forward. His whole body was soft, and he seemed to be extremely weak. 2 clear footsteps could be heard on the blood-soaked ground. The thing behind him moved almost at the same time as him. Gu Xingyan stopped again. The thing behind him also stopped. It seemed that something had stuck to his back. It was faintly discernible. Gu Xingyan didn't know if it was his illusion. His cell phone suddenly rang. It was supposed to be very soft music, but in the current atmosphere, it was indescribably harsh, with a strong ominous aura. Gu Xingyan trembled slightly and subconsciously took out the phone. The phone that had no signal for a long time had full signal bars at this time. Jiang Shangyu's name was shaking on the phone. Gu Xingyan gritted his teeth and answered the phone directly without any hesitation. Your Highness, I'm sorry. There was an accident. I'm late. Jiang Shangyu's gentle voice sounded on the other end of the phone. As he spoke, the blood on the ground began to disappear. And the alley began to disappear. All kinds of chaotic sounds rang in his ears again. Gu Xingyan held the phone, and his body trembled. He suddenly found that everything just now seemed to be extremely illusory. He did not move his body. His body was still standing by the gate, and the black cat behind him was still staring at him. He stood on the street, listening to the chaotic conversation around him. I can assure you that it was an accident. Jiang Shangyu's voice was apologetic and sincere, but it was extremely terrifying in Gu Xingyan's ears. The corner of his mouth moved with difficulty. He opened his mouth several times and finally made a sound. Where are you? The domain spread over silently. Jiang Shangyu's figure gradually took shape in the vague domain, and finally stood in front of Gu Xingyan. I'm sorry. Jiang Shangyu looked at his pale face and said again. Gu Xingyan looked at him in a daze. After a long time he asked in a hoarse voice, Where is this? This is my territory. Jiang Shangyu was silent for a while and laughed. It's my base. Of course, it will also be your highness's base in the future. Your highness, you kept your promise and came here, and I kept my promise to you. This will be one of our most important bases. From now on, we are on the same side. He said slowly, stretched out his palm to Gu Xingyun, and said in a low voice, Your Highness Gu Xingyun, welcome to the Shadow World. Chapter 1100. After attending Chen Fangqing's funeral, Li Tianlan returned to the hotel. He had his own property in Yuzhou. Now many people were eyeing it, but no one dared to do anything about it. The prince's mansion, which could be exchanged for astronomical amounts of money as long as he opened his mouth, was his property. But it was the wedding house prepared for him in Dongqing Rushi by the Dongqing clan. If Dongqing Rushi was in good condition, Li Tianlan would not mind taking Qin Weibai to live in it. But in Dongqing Rushi's current state, Li Tianlan felt a little awkward to do so. Qin Weibai also had many properties in Yuzhou, two of which could be said to be in the center of Yuzhou, where the traffic was extremely convenient and everything was convenient. But for the same reason Dongqing Wudi, the key members of the Bai family and other giant group gathered in Yuzhou, Li Tianlan also felt very awkward. This could not be regarded as being overcautious. This year, Li Tianlan was 24 years old. For the time being, he had not really experienced the loneliness of standing at the top and the power of the world, but he had subconsciously begun to consider the chain reaction caused by his every move. Especially in this sensitive period, Li Tianlan did not know how many times he had told himself that at this stage, he could not take a wrong step. So after thinking about it, he still lived in the hotel. To some extent, only this hotel could be regarded as his own property. The Flourishing Age Fund secretly held 27% of the shares of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, which could be said to be the second largest shareholder in the hotel. As the Flourishing Age Fund merged into Emperor Dong's palace, the owner of these shares naturally became Li Tianlan. After dinner in his own hotel, Li Tianlan received a call from Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi's voice sounded very calm on the phone, but perhaps it was a psychological illusion. Li Tianlan always felt that his tone was a little depressed. Tianlan, come and have a cup of tea at home. Dongqing Wudi said slowly. Li Tianlan looked at his watch. At 8 o'clock in the evening, after attending Chen Fangqing's funeral, Dongqing Wudi went to the army headquarters building. Until now he probably had not eaten. Li Tianlan smiled and said softly, Let's have dinner together. I'll go there now. There are a few good dishes in the hotel. I'll take them there by the way. Okay. Dongqing Wudi smiled. Although he was a little depressed in his heart, there was still a touch of joy in his voice. Bring Little Bai here and stay at home tonight. Li Tianlan hesitated for a moment and agreed. In Yuzhou, the house that Dongqing Wudi mentioned was the manor of the Bai family. Li Tianlan silently thought about what had happened in the past few days. After thinking for about 2 or 3 minutes, he raised his head and said, Let's go together. Qin Weibai had just put down the phone to order food. She nodded and asked, Should we call the fatty? No need. Li Tianlan shook his head. He and Xing Tian have been busy these days. Don't worry about him. Xianyuan Wushang was very busy. On the day of Chen Fangqing's death, Li Huaqing held a meeting in the Chen family until 3 in the morning. During the nearly 14-hour meeting, Li Tianlan was under unimaginable pressure. At this stage, no matter how strong he was, he could not reach the point of dictating the entire world. Compromise, retreat, and when there was no other choice, no matter how unwilling he was, he had to make these decisions. At the meeting, it was decided that Hua Zhengyang would temporarily preside over the work of the cabinet. At the same time, many departments of the cabinet were adjusted to a certain extent. In just a few days, it was said that there were some changes in Bai Qingqian's transfer. Unfavorable things happened one after another. Li Tianlan had almost no power to fight back, and could only compromise for the time being. He had to be steady. He had to be steady. No matter what he did now, no matter what he did, his actions would be misunderstood, or even misinterpreted into other meanings. The only thing he could do was to keep silent, and keep making concessions in silence. Xianyuan Wushang also clearly felt Li Tianlan's pressure. He even took the initiative to transfer most of the pressure to himself. He almost made a guarantee that he would find out the cause of Chen Shi's death. With Chen Fengqing's death, Chen Shi, who died on the same day as him, was naturally thought by everyone to be killed by Li Tianlan. The same cause of death, the same mystery, and the same contact with Li Tianlan. All the clues were extremely unfavorable to Li Tianlan. Chen Fengqing's death had crossed the bottom line of Zhongzhou state. And Chen Shi's death, in the eyes of others, was almost like Li Tianlan slapping everyone in the parliament unscrupulously. This was also the main reason why he had been under great pressure these days. Xianyuan Wuxiang could not find out the cause of Chen Fengqing's death for the time being, but he could find out the truth of Chen Shi's death. Li Tianlan had been making concessions step by step. He had not left Yuzhou until now, waiting for the truth. So since he came back in the middle of the night, Xianyuan Wuxiang had locked himself in his room. It was said that he was fully cooperating with Xing Tian to investigate the cause of Chen Shi's death. Li Tianlan did not know how they could investigate the truth without going out. But perhaps Xianyuan Wuxiang's attitude was too firm, so Li Tianlan instinctively believed him. Walking out of the room, Li Tianlan took a deep look at the closed door on the opposite side. He was sure that Xianyuan Wuxiang and Xing Tian had not left the room these days. But in his perception, the opposite room was empty. Not only was there no breath of living people, even the furniture inside had disappeared. In Li Tianlan's perception, everything in the opposite room had become pure emptiness. He narrowed his eyes and shook his head, saying, "Let's go." Qin Weibai subconsciously took his arm, and also glanced at the opposite side of Xianyuan Wuxiang. She silently followed Li Tianlan to the elevator. In the room that the two of them did not notice, there was already an extremely dark void around them. Countless stars were twinkling in the void. Subtle lights constantly lit up in the dark space, and then quickly fell silent. They were not the distant stars around them. Instead, they were tiny characters. The characters flickered and appeared, and then went away in an instant. They seemed to fly thousands of kilometers in a very short time, flying into the distance and turning into a faint glimmer, which looked like a starry sky. The words flew further and further away. The furthest one could no longer be seen, but the words that were constantly being created were still moving further away. Hence, there were more and more starlight. They disappeared and appeared in batches, and their positions were constantly changing. In the silent void, it was as if the stars in the sky were constantly arranged and twinkling. In the vast void, there was a huge writing brush flying. With the void as ink, the huge writing brush carved characters one after another in the vast space at an extremely fast speed. In the void stood a giant that could be said to be indomitable. His body, which was originally the size of a normal person and looked somewhat harmless, seemed to be magnified thousands of times here. He stood in the dark void, and at this time, his huge body revealed an indescribable majesty. The shimmer was everywhere. Xianyuan Wuxiang, who had transformed into a giant, held the same huge writing brush tightly, and kept writing in the darkness. Rather than saying that he was writing, it was more accurate to say that the writing brush was controlling his palm to write. The original form of the writing brush was Xing Tian. When he opened his power to the greatest extent, he became a writing brush in this void that could almost reach the sky in terms of height. Starting from the smallest things, he began to deeply explore the truth of Chen Shi's death. In this huge deduction, the only thing Xianyuan Wuxiang needed to do was to provide his own vitality and countless recovery methods that belonged to Saint to help Xing Tian maintain his own state. At this time, the vitality of the two was completely connected. In the case of sharing life, Xianyuan Wuxiang's existence gave Xing Tian the greatest guarantee, and also made Xing Tian's deduction more and more leisurely. 20 years ago, Chen Song was Lu He's driver. The national emblem of Star State issued a new revised law. One night in England, the rich William died in a car accident. The financial crisis of East Island. Military counselor founded the Flourishing Age Fund. The Deludes Group declared bankruptcy. A mountain village in Zhongzhou State had 35 newborns in a year. Chen Lan's salary increased by more than 30%. Han Jie planned to send his son abroad to study. There was a terrorist attack in France. There were so many of them that they were densely packed. One after another, the writing brush kept writing in the crazy waving. Time was meaningless. No one knew how long the real time of 3 days passed in the void. But the brush kept on writing, and it didn't stop. 1 thing, 10 things, 100 things, 1,000,000 things, 10,000,000 things, hundreds of millions, billions, tens of billions. There were countless incidents that seemed to be completely unrelated to each other. But as more and more things were written with the brush, each thing began to gradually connect after going through millions of twists and turns. 2, 3, thousands, and more people who had nothing to do with each other in their lives began to interact with each other that even they themselves didn't know about. For example, if William, the rich businessman in England, hadn't died in a car accident, then Han Jie wouldn't have sent his son abroad to study. These two things seemed to have nothing to do with each other. But they also had a direct relationship. Everyone had their own network around them. People in their own network also had their own network. Everyone on the internet had their own small circle. All kinds of people. When everyone interacted with each other because of one thing, the circles on the internet began to fluctuate to different degrees. Such fluctuations might be subtle. But when tens of billions or even hundreds of billions of things were listed, the subtle fluctuations appeared in the most obvious way in front of Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian. From this point of view, why did Chen Shi die? Maybe it was because of Li Tianlan, or maybe it was because of other reasons. This was the time limit. When this limit was no longer meaningful, the original reason could be defined by the writing brush, Xing Tian. Why did Chen Shi die? Because 20 years ago, Chen Song was Lu He's driver. There was a reason. Now what Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian needed to do was to find that result. This was cause and effect. The writing brush kept shining. Somewhere in the quiet void, Xianyuan Wushang's voice clearly sounded with a long sigh. The writing brush in his hand was still moving. After countless twists and turns of events, the writing brush wrote Chen Shi's name for the first time. Chapter 1101. The densely packed words flew further and further away, gradually turning into pieces of glittering starlight in the void. But when Chen Shi's name appeared for the first time, the two words suddenly shone as if by magic. The fluttering brush seemed to have suddenly outlined two suns. The light was incomparably bright, and all the surrounding starlight seemed to have disappeared. Imperceptibly, among the countless events, a large number of karmic connections began to collapse. The brush continued to write, but unlike before, Chen Shi's name was like a central point. In a flash, all the events began to be written with the Chen family, and even Chen Shi as the center. Those things that seemed inexplicably unrelated to the Chen family completely disappeared. One event after another began to appear around the Chen family. Every core member of the Chen family, every distant relative, every servant, every friend, friend of a friend, friend of a servant, friend of a relative, friends of friends of friends. In a flash, another incomparably complex web of events began to appear, woven by thousands of people. Slowly, the clear light flowed from Xianyuan Wushang's palm into the brush. The brush moved faster and faster, and the writing gradually became impudent and fierce. Chen Shi's name appeared for the second time. The already extremely complex web of events was once again broken by more than half. A large number of Chen family members and friends were eliminated, and the dense web became a relatively complicated ball of threads. All kinds of clues intertwined together. The brush continued to write. Chen Shi's name soon appeared for the third time. The light in the void was even brighter. The complicated ball of threads was simplified a lot. At the same time, many suspects were eliminated. Chen Shi's name appeared for the fourth time. It was also at this time that the ball of threads intertwined with all kinds of clues began to become clear. Threads spread in all directions with Chen Shi as the center, connecting one seemingly unimportant event after another. The web of events began to become clear and simple. Chen Shi's name appeared for the fifth time. Most of the original hundreds of threads disappeared in an instant, leaving only 30 or so, connecting less than 20,000 events. The writing continued, but the brush gradually began to tremble. Xianyuan Wushang also trembled, but his face was taut, and he gritted his teeth and persevered. Chen Shi's name appeared for the sixth time. The 30 lines turned into 9. Tens of thousands of incidents became less than 2,000 incidents. The slowly moving brush wrote Chen Shi's name for the seventh time. The 9 lines became 3. The less than 2,000 incidents were reduced to less than 200. The 3 lines represented the 3 people closest to Chen Shi. They were also the 3 most suspicious people. As for the events that were less than 200, it was what the 3 of them had done recently, who they had interacted with, and what the people who had interacted with the 3 of them had interacted with the people they knew. This kind of interaction would continue to develop with the 3 of them as the core. And what would be the final result if the series of events continued to link up? Chen Shi's name didn't light up this time. However, the events on one of the 3 lines continued to develop, and at the end, a question mark appeared. Xing Tian, who was in a state of investigation, could be said to have no self-awareness. Xianyuan Wushang couldn't control the brush to write. All he could do was provide it with his own life force. Therefore, this question mark was written by the power of karma itself. A question mark popped up. What did this mean? Nowadays, there were not many people on Earth that Xing Tian couldn't even write their names and things. There were probably no more than 10 people. Li Tianlan, Qin Weibai, and Xing Tian couldn't write them. Dongcheng Rushi and Wang Yuetong couldn't write them. Wang Tianzong and Xing Tian couldn't write them. Li Huaqing and Xing Tian could barely write half of them. Jiang Shangyu and Xing Tian couldn't write them. This list didn't include Xianyuan Wushang and Lin Shi. Decades later, Zhou Yuanshan's name might be added to this list. But now Xing Tian couldn't write them. It had nothing to do with Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai. It had nothing to do with Dongcheng Rushi and Wang Yuetong. Wang Tianzong didn't have that ability. If it was Li Huaqing, Xing Tian could write at least one word in his name, and then add a question mark. When all these targets were ruled out, who else could it be? Who else could it be? Jiang Shangyu. This was the answer that Feng Qinggu told Xing Tian, and it was also Xing Tian's own answer. He was not surprised by this answer, and it wasn't even important. The most important thing was that they found the line that connected Jiang Shangyu to him. 2 of the 3 lines disappeared the moment the question mark appeared. All that was left was a dazzling line that appeared in the void. More than half of the related matters were instantly reduced, leaving only a few. Within half a year of becoming Chen Shi's full-time secretary, Mao Song met Lu Dongyue at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Lu Dongyue introduced his cousin Lin Yin to Mao Song. Lin Yin became Mao Song's lover. Lin Yin's code name in the Phoenix Pavilion was Red Snow, and he was Lu Dongyue's direct subordinate. Lu Dongyue believed that Chen Shi's future was bright, and his full-time secretary was bound to become an important figure in the Prince Group. This was a long-term investment. 20 years ago, when Lu Dongyue's company was facing a major crisis, he received an important investment. The investor was Distance Investment Group. The Jiang family of Beijiang owned 75% of the shares of Distance Investment Group. 10 years ago, Lu Dongyue was secretly absorbed into Phoenix Pavilion and became the leader of Cyan Phoenix Group. He was responsible for the affairs of Nanyuan for Kunlun City, providing an opportunity to infiltrate the Phoenix Pavilion. Mao Song was the 16th chess piece of Phoenix Pavilion in Southern Cloud. Lin Yin was Mao Song's lover. As the master, after the battle in North Sea, in order to cope, a rainbow-colored ray of light suddenly appeared. The brush continued to write. Cope secretly met with Mao Song and got Mao Song's promise. Bloodshirt and Mao Song shared life and appeared at the place where Chen Fangqing's body was stored. Mao Song and Chen Shi were in close contact. Chen Shi's name appeared on the brush again. Everything that had happened had come to light. The brush was still writing. It wrote dozens of things in succession, and then everything was completely over. The void disappeared abruptly. The huge brush and the giant version of Xianyuan Wushang all disappeared. Xing Tian's huge body almost collapsed on the ground. His face was pale, and his body was covered with sweat. Xianyuan Wushang, who looked harmless, was also extremely weak. All the furniture in the room was restored to its original state the moment the void disappeared. Xianyuan Wushang fell on the bed, panting for a long time, and then slowly sat up. Nothing can happen to Mao Song and Lin Yin. He looked at Xing Tian and said slowly. Xing Tian nodded, stretched out his huge hand, tore the space, and condensed a brush. He thought for a moment, and then slowly wrote in the void. In order to avoid suspicion as much as possible, Mao Song's life will not be in danger for the time being. At this stage, his death will cause a lot of changes in the plan, and the situation is very optimistic. In order to avoid complications, Mao Song will be very safe in the near future. His death will happen a year later, when everything calms down and he is forgotten. Kill him and copulate? Given his character, this is completely reasonable. Likewise, in order to stabilize Mao Song, Lin Yin's life will also be protected, and she will also be very safe in the near future. One day in a year, she will die with Mao Song, and there will be a lot of rumors. This is also reasonable. The words imprinted in the void flickered twice, and then disappeared in the void. Xing Tian glanced at Xianyuan Wushang and said hoarsely, 1 year should be enough. It won't take that long, but so be it. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. The brush in Xing Tian's hand became a mass of air again. This also belonged to the power of calligraphers. If investigating the truth of Chen Shi's death through tens of billions of events was to establish the power of cause and effect, then the 2 paragraphs about the ending of Mao Song and Lin Yin after Xing Tian's words were equivalent to prophecies. 1 year, this was the ending written by Xing Tian. During this period, unless there was a more powerful authority than Xing Tian that directly crushed everything he set, the fate of the 2 could hardly be changed. They would be very safe for a year, and even if they encountered danger, they would be safe. They would suddenly die one day a year later, together, and cause a lot of rumors. This was the ending. This was the ending written by Xing Tian, the ending defined by the world for them. Xianyuan Wushang reached out and touched the bed, and took out a crumpled box of Zhonghua cigarettes. He pulled out a cigarette and lit it, took a deep breath, and slowly narrowed his eyes. Jiang Shangyu. Your Highness. Xing Tian hesitated for a moment and said softly. Princess Royal reminded us that Jiang Shangyu is not someone we can deal with. To be exact, if we take action, we may alarm something on him. Maybe it already knows of our existence. Why do we need to take action to deal with Jiang Shangyu? Can't our big brother manipulate him? Xianyuan Wushang smiled. Besides, even if our big brother doesn't take action, Lin Shi came here with a mission. He needs to give us an explanation, so he will take action sooner or later. After taking a deep breath, he picked up his cell phone and began to make a call. While waiting for the number to be dialed, Xianyuan Wushang laughed comfortably and happily. Phoenix Pavilion, Guxingyun, Kunlun City, Jiang Shangyu. I'm afraid we have gained a lot this time. Unfortunately, there is only one chance. Maybe after this, Jiang Shangyu will notice our existence, and he may have more scruples in the future. Xing Tian shook his head. Maybe he will have more scruples, but it is more likely that he will pay a higher price to kill your majesty. The combination of the calligrapher and the saint might not be as strong as the saint and the apostle around Lin Shi, but in the current real environment, Xianyuan Wushang and Xing Tian were the most powerful combination under all kinds of restrictions. It was a combination that could make Li Tianlan invincible under all kinds of circumstances. Xianyuan Wushang held the phone, and there was no expression on his chubby face. He said blandly, he has no chance. I can feel the change in my big brother. Maybe it won't be long before he can have the characteristic of level 8 authority. Then who can kill him? Chapter 1102. Li Kuangtu quietly looked at the village in front of him. The village surrounded by the virgin forest maintained the most ancient style to the greatest extent. It was undeveloped and deviated from all shipping routes. For many years, it was so inaccessible that the village did not even have its own name. The village was not big. To be exact, there were 201 households and 463 people. In this village, more than 200 families had always lived on the land of Zhongzhou State. But there was no doubt that they were outside the map of Zhongzhou State. In a sense, they were outside the law of Zhongzhou State. Hidden, remote, and mysterious. This was indeed the most suitable location for a secret base. But backwardness and poverty also made it difficult for the owner of this base to train the most modern soldiers. Li Kuangtu looked at everything in front of him indifferently. This was the biggest trump card that Jiang Shangyu wanted to show him. He saw what he wanted. He was a little tempted, but also a little regretful. Crack! In the distance, in front of an ordinary wooden door, a little girl who looked to be only 8 or 9 years old, wearing a dirty cotton dress, sat on the steps in front of the door. She used her tender little hands to tear apart a steel plate, that was nearly 10 centimeters thick. The little black cat that was squatting on her shoulder meowed and jumped down from her shoulder, hiding behind her. The little girl was expressionless and seemed to be thinking about how to turn the steel plate into a shape that she was satisfied with. Even with Li Guangtu's train of thought, he could not see what the little girl was trying to do. He could only barely see that she seemed to want to make a weapon, but as she continued to toss, the steel plate quickly became fragmented, and the remaining fragments turned into countless strange and twisted shapes. The girl did not feel annoyed. She just looked at the countless twisted steel plates in front of her in a daze. Li Guangtu marveled at the strength of the other party, and also regretted the other party's thinking. The other party seemed to have no thoughts, not even the most basic understanding of the shape of a weapon. That was why the high-strength alloy steel plate was tossed around by her. But she did not realize what went wrong at all. The strength of the other party combined with her age was also incredible in Li Guangtu's eyes. He had personally tested the hardness of the alloy. With his strength, it was a piece of cake for him to tear the alloy. But the little girl could also disassemble the steel plate into strange shapes with her bare hands, which showed that at least in terms of strength, the little girl was no longer at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, or even some thundershocking realm experts. What did it mean for an 8 or 9-year-old girl to have such power? Some things could not be explained by the word genius. The little girl's existence was not an exception. Every villager here seemed to have extraordinary physical qualities that exceeded the understanding of normal people. More than 400 people. Li Guangtu carefully observed and finally came to a conclusion that even he himself couldn't believe. Among the more than 400 villagers, men and women, old and young, their strength indexes were almost all at the peak of the thundershocking realm on average. Among the more than 400 people, there were many little girls who were less than 10 years old, and there were also old people who were over 70 years old. Their strength would be slightly weaker. As for those young people and strong men and women, the top level of strength among them had even reached the invincible realm, and the strength of the half-step invincible realm was everywhere. What did this mean? The Border Control Corps of Zhongzhou State was known as the strongest and most elite corps in the world. The 20,000 soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion in the Border Control Corps were the most elite troops of the Border Control Corps. There were many reasons for the Thunderbolt Battalion's current status. They had the most domineering commander-in-chief, the most rigorous training, the most tenacious fighting will, and the absolute belief in victory. Among so many factors, the strength of the Thunderbolt Battalion was naturally the most important. The average strength of the 20,000 soldiers of the Thunderbolt Battalion was at the ice-condensing realm. They had surpassed the chi-controlling realm of the 4 realms of martial arts. Among the corps of tens of thousands of people, the Thunderbolt Battalion was the only large-scale army in the world whose average strength had reached the ice-condensing realm. Therefore, they could defeat any enemy on any battlefield. They were invincible and invincible. 20,000 elite soldiers who were familiar with all kinds of combat methods, could skillfully use any weapon, and kept their physical functions at the peak. Even the top experts at the peak of the invincible realm did not dare to fight them head-on. And if the scale was further reduced, the Heaven Punishment Troop of the Wang family of Beihai was the peak of the small-scale super-elite troop. There were 300 people in the Heaven Punishment Troop. Their average strength was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, and even close to the half-step thunderbolt realm. Such a troop was also a myth in the dark world. Zhongzhou State could also come up with this kind of lineup, but it would not do so. Any expert close to the thundershocking realm was a very important backbone in their respective troops. Except for the Wang family of Beihai, no one would be so extravagant as to form a super-elite troop with the backbone of these middle-level and high-level officers. Therefore, the Heaven Punishment Troop had existed for hundreds of years, but for hundreds of years, no super troop could really be as famous as the Heaven Punishment Troop. The closest to the overall strength of the All Heavens Troop was the Lin clan's Xianyuan sword, and the Li family's life-prolonging palace, Deathless Palace, and Sunluo Palace after Nirvana turned into the purgatory of Heaven Capital. But they were just close. And now, what Li Guangtu saw was a super-elite troop whose strength was a whole realm higher than that of the Heaven Punishment Troop, which was also a myth, and more than 100 people more than the Heaven Punishment Troop. More than 400 people. Their average strength was at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Even Li Kuangtu felt his scalp tingle when he thought of this. More than 400 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and even close to the half-step invincible realm. If they had enough experience, tacit cooperation, perfect performance, and formed a perfect enough formation, Li Kuangtu didn't know who could withstand their full outbreak. At least he could be sure that he couldn't. When the power of more than 400 experts close to the half-step invincible realm broke out as a whole, that kind of power was completely destructive. This kind of troop had never appeared in the wildest imagination of the boldest people, because everyone knew it was impossible. The peak of the fire-flaming realm was already a middle-level and high-level officer in the army of the world's #1 hegemon country, Zhongzhou State, and was the backbone of the army lineup. What did the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and the half-step invincible realm mean? This was the power of the general level. The experts who could go to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm would not be unknown in Zhongzhou State. With such strength, as long as they were not stupid or there were no special reasons, they would at least be major generals, and most of them would be lieutenant generals. Put more than 400 generals together to form a troop? Let's put that aside first. Did Zhongzhou State have the strength to come up with such a lineup? Even if they could, who would do it? The strength of such a troop was indeed extremely powerful, but once it was hit hard, the consequences would be disastrous. So the idea of forming a dream troop with the average strength of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm had never even appeared, and no one thought about it. But now, in this backward and remote village with almost no modern facilities, Li Kuangtu saw such a troop with the strength close to the half-step invincible realm. Apart from the surprise, Li Kuangtu's mind was completely filled with a feeling of disbelief. Of course, the so-called average strength here referred to the average strength. The average strength of the villagers did reach the level close to the half-step invincible realm. But in fact, Li Kuangtu could also see that they had almost no fighting consciousness, no fighting intuition, and no contact with martial arts. In this case, their physical functions and strength were strong enough, but if they were all pulled out to fight against the opponent, not to mention the 20,000 Thunderbolt Battalion, even the 300 Heaven Punishment Troop, could kill these villagers several times in minutes. But Li Kuangtu was not disappointed at all. Fighting consciousness, fighting experience, and the level of martial arts, these things could be filled in without much effort. As for the most difficult level to reach, these villagers had all reached the standard. This also meant that the more than 400 villagers in front of him were like more than 400 pieces of white paper, whose strength had reached the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and they could draw at will into all kinds of shapes. A piece of white paper was good for drawing. Li Kuangtu took a deep breath. As his figure flashed, his body appeared beside Jiang Shangyu. Jiang Shangyu lay on a dry grassland, bathed in the pale, almost cold sunlight, with a licorice in his mouth, looking at the sun in the sky in a very leisurely manner. Li Kuangtu looked at him, and was silent for a long time. Then he said seriously, word by word, "Amazing. I'm flattered." Jiang Shangyu smiled lazily and said, "The strength of these people has indeed reached a certain level, but it's not very useful for the time being. But the future is already worth looking forward to," Li Kuangtu said with some emotion. "So I said, the future is mine." Jiang Shangyu laughed. Li Kuangtu was silent again. After a full 2 or 3 minutes, he suddenly asked, "If these people have a certain degree of combat effectiveness and enough tacit understanding, do you think they can pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan now?" "It's hard to say." Jiang Shangyu was also silent for a moment, and then he shook his head. "But it doesn't matter. The trump card in my hand is indeed worth looking forward to, but now is far from the time for them to be exposed. Their strength can be further enhanced. When they really reach their limit, they can definitely pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. As for now, I'm not very clear." Li Kuangtu's body shook slightly. His mind was full of Jiang Shangyu's words. Their strength can be further enhanced. Further? His voice suddenly trembled a little. Further enhancement? To what extent? To the invincible realm. Jiang Shangyu said blandly, "Of course it will take a long time, but it will come eventually. At that time, maybe the so-called invincible realm will really be like grass." Chapter 1103. Pictures that he had never imagined before appeared in Li Guangtu's mind. Perhaps he and Jiang Shangyu would never know that in the era of Beihai and the purgatory of Heaven Capital, when there were metaphysical masters in Zhongzhou State, Xian Xuanzi and Great Master Wu Wei had long predicted that the invincible realm was as weak as grass. When the Chosen One appeared, the tribulation came. The Chosen One should face the tribulation. And who should face the Chosen One? Xian Xuanzi's words still had traces of existence. But with the death of Great Master Wu Wei and the disappearance of Xian Xuanzi, these traces were fading in everyone's hearts day by day, until Jiang Shangyu's voice rang in Li Guangtu's ears. The light voice was as deafening as thunder. A whole village with an average strength of the invincible realm. More than 400 people. In the entire dark world, there probably wouldn't be so many invincible realm experts in the world for hundreds of years. Li Guangtu looked at Jiang Shangyu seriously. There was deep fear in his eyes. There was also a touch of undisguised fear. He didn't want to admit it, but he had to. If what Jiang Shangyu said was true, when more than 400 invincible realm experts charged at the same time, what was Li Tianlan? At best, he could only be regarded as a nonentity, and he himself was even less than an ant. If this thing became true, where would he find his place in the future? Things were not as bad as he thought. Of course, they were not as good as he thought. Jiang Shangyu interrupted Li Guangtu's thoughts and said with a smile, "The world has changed." "What do you mean?" Li Guangtu frowned. Jiang Shangyu smiled without saying a word. He just looked at the villagers coming and going in the village not far away. This was obviously not their normal state, so their movements always seemed a little stiff and uncoordinated. Li Guangtu couldn't see anything because he didn't know this place. But these flaws were very clear in Jiang Shangyu's eyes. He hid something from Li Guangtu. For example, the camp behind him and the true face of the village. Li Guangtu was completely different from Gu Xingyun. Gu Xingyun, who seemed to be awe-inspiring, had almost lost all his spirit. For the survival of himself and his tribe, Gu Xingyun could give up anything. The vast division of camps might have been different in his thinking, which was limited by the region. Therefore, Jiang Shangyu could make Gu Xingyun one of his people. However, Li Guangtu was still proud. Even if his current strength had been surpassed by Li Tianlan, the pride in his heart did not disappear much. The Li family's stubbornness doomed him to be the second Gu Xingyun. In order to survive, Gu Xingyun could not give up anything. People like Li Guangtu were willing to sacrifice anything in order to survive. Gu Xingyun could give up his dignity, status, and reputation. But when it was necessary, Li Guangtu was willing to sacrifice his life at all costs. There were too many things worth discussing about Li Guangtu's character. But every invincible realm expert who came out of the Li family did not lack the strength of character that would rather break than bend. Perhaps when things really reached the point of no return, Li Guangtu would refuse everyone's alliance, even disband the purgatory of Heaven Capital, and challenge Li Tianlan alone. This seemed to be an unreasonable act of courting death. But Li Guangtu was such a person. Such a person lived not to keep anything, but to pursue something. The chaotic behavior of the dark shadow world was regarded by many people as evil and degeneration. In fact, it was just the purest chaos, but it was indeed the darkness more evil than degeneration. Li Guangtu might not accept the gift from the dark shadow world. More importantly, as Dongqing Rushi's biological father, the dark shadow world did not dare to pollute before it was fully sure. Pollute him. However, Jiang Shangyu finally told some truth to Li Guangtu. The world was indeed changing. The initial change began when Li Tianlan triggered the sword energy left by the god of war to deal with the sneak attack of him and Li Guangtu. The miracle city in the real environment had some interaction with the starry sky. At that moment, both the Order Camp and the Dark Shadow Camp could roughly detect the vague location of the miracle city and Li Tianlan's aura. When the two environments, illusion and reality, merged to a certain extent, the world was also changing unconsciously. The most obvious change was that it was easier to break through in strength than before. More than 400 people in the village could reach the strength of the invincible realm. And as time went on, there would be more and more invincible realm experts in the dark world. Invincible realm experts were like grass. What was coming was a chaotic world, a prosperous world, and also the end of the world. Jiang Shangyu quietly observed the villagers in the village. How to use this force to completely kill Li Tianlan before his official return was the primary problem he needed to consider now. With Li Tianlan's current strength, it was obviously impossible to kill Li Tianlan with the village in front of him. He had to turn these villagers into elite soldiers in line with the standards of the Dark Shadow world as soon as possible. They were elite soldiers, not elites. The most basic condition for the so-called elite soldiers was to be able to survive in the void environment and have a certain degree of destructive power on the battlefield, where the victory in the starry sky was the prerequisite. That was the real invincible realm. They could survive temporarily by using their own domain and sword energy to form a domain that could isolate the void. This was the goal that Jiang Shangyu had to achieve now. The strength of these people is still too weak. Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. They're like pieces of blank paper. Although they're very strong, they don't have the slightest bit of awareness and experience. Their tacit understanding is also close to zero. In their current state, an army of 5,000 people can easily wipe out an entire village. They don't even need to be elites at the ace level. Just a first-line army with sufficient equipment can easily wipe out an entire village. Li Guangtu commented bluntly. Fortunately, this is temporary, Jiang Shangyu said with a smile. In the near future, I will find a way to instill something into them, such as combat experience, combat tacit understanding, and so on. At least it can lay some foundation for them. Instill? Li Guangtu raised his eyebrows in surprise. After living for so long, it was the first time that he had heard that this thing could be instilled. It probably needs a processor to download something, and then the data transmission. My metaphor is a little inappropriate, but that's the general idea. Jiang Shangyu explained very seriously. Processor? Li Guangtu muttered to himself. Huh. Isn't that a ready-made processor? His download should be almost done. Jiang Shangyu casually pointed in a certain direction. Li Guangtu's pupils contracted slightly. Of course he knew who was there. But before he could say anything, the village in front of him suddenly changed. Sunlight, streets, houses, people, space. Everything seemed to distort in an instant without warning. Boom. In the huge roar, in the corner of the village, in the direction that Jiang Shangyu pointed, a clear wave of air that was visible to the naked eye suddenly exploded. The wave of air twisted and changed, and it looked as if the space of the whole village was constantly boiling. An aura that had been suppressed for a long time was rising unscrupulously in the wave of air, as if it would never have a limit. That was the aura close to the peak of the invincible realm. As soon as Li Guangtu came to this conclusion, the rising aura, it had directly crossed the threshold of the peak of the invincible realm. It was easy, natural, and without any reluctance. The peak of the invincible realm seemed to be just a starting point. The strong aura kept rising again and again, madly rushing in the domain of the peak of the invincible realm. 1 minute or 1 hour. In his perception, the aura steadily stayed at the level of only half a step, or even a small half step away from breaking through to the peak of the invincible realm. The domain, which was so strong that it seemed to be a substance, distorted everything that could be seen with the naked eye. It was constantly shrinking and expanding. The corner of Li Guangtu's mouth twitched slightly. That was the aura of Gu Xingyun. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have believed that Gu Xingyun could make such a major breakthrough in just a few days. From close to the peak of the invincible realm, he climbed all the way to the peak of the invincible realm. Half a year, 1 year, 2 years, maybe tomorrow, Gu Xingyun might break through again and stand at the same height as him. Gu Xingyun. Was this the processor that Jiang Shangyu mentioned? That was the fact. Gu Xingyun, who had successfully broken through, did not have time to be ecstatic. He didn't even have time to feel the changes in his body. At the moment of the breakthrough, he opened his eyes. In the deepest level of meditation, his surroundings had already become a void of nothingness. But the moment he opened his eyes, pieces of blood-red shimmer lit up in the void. In front of him, thousands of eyes appeared without any warning. Those pairs of eyes squeezed together and stared straight at Gu Xingyun. Every pair of eyes seemed to be speaking, conveying some kind of information to him. His brain was passively accepting everything and operating at a crazy speed. Hence, his aura continued to rise, and all kinds of battle scenes kept appearing in his mind. Countless eyes continued to instill some information into him. His brain seemed to have become a hard disk, and the storage space had reached its limit. Hence, endless information was spilled out. In the end, everyone in the village stopped. More than 400 villagers seemed to have become a whole brain. Everyone began to accept all kinds of chaotic, but extremely clear information. Jiang Shangyu and Li Guangtu were both watching this scene. The former's eyes were deep, but the latter's eyes were only blank. Gu Xingyun's strength is very good now, Jiang Shangyu suddenly said. Li Guangtu gritted his teeth and snorted, saying nothing. He could feel that Gu Xingyun's strength was still at the peak of the invincible realm, but the other party had a vague sense of danger that made him feel uncomfortable. In a sense, the current Gu Xingyun seemed to have become an example similar to Li Tianlan, whose strength exceeded his realm. The only difference was that Li Tianlan's strength exceeded his realm by too much. I want to try again, Jiang Shangyu said in a low voice. What? Li Guangtu frowned. Kill Li Tianlan. Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Guangtu with a smile. With the three of us and some villagers at most, do you think it's feasible? Before Li Guangtu could speak, Jiang Shangyu continued. I've already given out the bait to test him. What kind of bait? What do you want to test? Li Guangtu asked with a frown. Two very suspicious people have appeared around Li Tianlan recently. I want to test their origins. Do you think it's easy? Li Guangtu shook his head disapprovingly. It's not difficult. There are always some things that they can't hide, such as some words that are taboo to them. Jiang Shangyu sneered. Chapter 1104. When the car entered the manor of the Bai family, Li Tianlan felt something and suddenly parked the car on the clean and tidy road of the manor. He got out of the car and quietly looked at the sky in the southeast direction, thinking about something. Qin Weibai, who had been a little absent-minded for a few days, and seemed to be thinking about something all the time, reacted after a while. She opened the door and walked to Li Tianlan, saying softly, "What's wrong?" "There is something strange there." Li Tianlan's voice was hesitant and uncertain, but the doubt in his eyes gradually began to become clear. It could not be said whether it was his own intuition or Heartless' will. In the sky extremely far away in the southeast direction, he could clearly feel a power that was of the same origin as Heartless twisting and struggling, as if it was imprisoned. Li Tianlan could feel Wuqing's desire, and he could also feel the longing of that massive energy for Wuqing in the distant southeast. When he perceived this, Li Tianlan suddenly understood something. That massive energy seemed to have been imprisoned for several days. It was constantly struggling, but it could not return to him and Wuqing. The sharpness in Li Tianlan's eyes flashed away. He did not know what could fix the energy belonging to a murderous weapon in a certain area for several days, but this feeling appeared so coincidentally that he instinctively felt that this phenomenon contained some artificial factors. Li Tianlan raised his palm slightly, and his eyes were cold. Qin Weibai looked at him in astonishment. Li Tianlan also looked at his raised palm in astonishment. He did not know what his instinct wanted to do. The energy that belonged to Ruthless suddenly became clear. Li Tianlan was sure that it was in the southeast direction. But after the sense of distance was magnified, it became extremely blurred. Vaguely, it was at least hundreds of kilometers away. If Ruthless was in his peak state, the distance of hundreds of kilometers could be said to be almost instantaneous. But now Ruthless' energy was exhausted, and his consciousness was blurred. And Li Tianlan himself, in a normal state, absolutely could not attack a target hundreds of kilometers away without knowing what it was. But at that moment, Li Tianlan's instinct told him that he could do it. He did not know why, but he felt that he could do it. The moment he raised his palm, it was as if he was holding a key. It was as if there was a door in front of him. As long as he used the key to open the door, his attack could be instantly transmitted hundreds of kilometers away. It could even be transmitted to any place in the world. The feeling was so clear that Li Tianlan was a little stunned. This slight astonishment caused his rationality to start thinking at the same time. And so the instinct disappeared. The key had also disappeared. In his perception, the energy that belonged to Heartless also became blurry. Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes, which were shining. The breakthrough into the invincible realm this time brought him more confusion than the power it brought him. That feeling of being able to accomplish something in a certain way appeared from time to time, turning into rays of dazzling light. They were like shooting stars in his mind, fleeting and uncontrollable. Li Tianlan roughly knew what he could do, but he had no idea how to do it. There seemed to be a thicker and thicker obstacle in front of him, causing him to have more and more doubts. Li Tianlan slowly lowered his palm with no expression on his face. Heartless, who was draped over his body, suddenly began to fly. Almost at the same time, the energy that belonged to Heartless in his perception became clear again. Something that imprisoned Heartless seemed to be aware of Li Tianlan's and Heartless' attention, and that feeling disappeared almost instantly. The next second, the transparent energy streaked across the sky at an unimaginable absolute speed, like a shooting star, heading straight for Yuzhou. Li Tianlan's gaze at the sky only slightly condensed for a moment. A colorful stream of light had already appeared at the end of his line of sight. Excitement, satisfaction, expectation, and a clear will made the energy not hide its whereabouts at all. A rainbow tens of thousands of meters long appeared over Yuzhou. The rainbow continued to spread, and the seemingly small but actually infinite energy hit the black windbreaker on Li Tianlan in the blink of an eye. The windbreaker, which was constantly flying, seemed to be completely quiet for a moment. Li Tianlan stood where he was for a long time without moving. At this moment, he seemed to be temporarily isolated from the world, and fell into an almost eternal meditation. At the same time, over the Bohai Strait of Zhongzhou State, Lin Shi and Wang Shengxiao were shrouded in the virtual light curtain made by the apostle. Looking at the direction where heartless energy disappeared, they were silent. The apostle was undoubtedly a little excited. He wanted to say something several times, but stopped himself. Finally, he couldn't help but say, "Your Highness, don't think too much." Lin Shi shook his head. "It's meaningless. With Her Highness's ability, even if it's just a wisp of consciousness, it's not something we can resist now. She said she would watch us, so we can't do what she doesn't want us to do." The double pupils in his eyes were constantly condensing and dispersing. As the pupils opened and closed, there seemed to be countless suns, moons, and stars rising and falling. He recalled some conclusions he had just come to when he came into contact with the energy, and finally shook his head. In the battle that year, King Wei's injury was too serious. Now is not the time to fuse. "King Wei?" Wang Shengxiao asked, feeling a little strange. From Africa continent to Bohai Sea, when the virtual data spread out, Wang Shengxiao could hardly feel the passage of time, and Wang Shengxiao didn't know what they were going to do here after crossing more than half of the world. In fact, from beginning to end, Wang Shengxiao didn't even see the energy that belonged to Heartless. Lin Shi glanced at Wang Shengxiao and said with a faint smile, "The King Wei I'm talking about is the life metal you've been studying for many years." At the end of his words, his tone was a little strange. After a few seconds of silence, he finally laughed mockingly. "Oh, metal. King Wei metal Heartless. Wuyo." Wang Shengxiao's heart suddenly tightened. Any topic about Wuyo could arouse his strong vigilance and defense now. He looked at Lin Shi calmly and said slowly, "Isn't that metal?" "You can say that," Lin Shi said faintly. "But in our understanding, the metal you know should be a piece of stone." "Stone?" Wang Shengxiao's eyes were a little strange. The Wang family of Beihai had never given up on the study of the life metal. After all, since they knew that it was a meteorite from outer space, a meteorite with its own consciousness and life, in the eyes of many people, this piece of metal was equivalent to the first officially confirmed extraterrestrial life. It might not be accurate to say that it was an alien, but it was extremely accurate to say that it was an extraterrestrial life. However, Wang Shengxiao was not surprised by this statement. The so-called life metal was originally a meteorite from outer space, and it could also be regarded as a stone. However, the Wang family of Beihai had studied it many times and never found that it had any characteristics that belonged to a stone. Lin Shi's eyes were in a trance for a moment. The deeds of King Wei in the space-time corridor had countless legends in the War God realm, the Emperor Palace, and even in the current Miracle City. It could be said that he was a household name. The legend of Miracle City had been revised a lot, and some things had even been beautified. But the records of King Wei outside Miracle City were all true. In Lin Shi's understanding of King Wei, his life was roughly divided into 3 stages. As the first alien lord of the human clan, King Wei's most glorious period was naturally the period when he fought side by side with the First Majesty. At the very beginning, King Wei was his weapon. That history was too ancient. Even the corridor of time and space had lost a lot of information in the many terminations and reincarnations. Even the Emperor of the corridor of time and space had forgotten most of it. All that was left were bits and pieces about King Wei. In this first most glorious period that belonged to King Wei, there was the clearest record about him that no one could forget. In King Wei, the authority that belonged to the human clan was born. This was the most authentic record and the biggest legend. And the second stage of King Wei was the stage where he was assimilated by the Order Camp. This soul-stirring legend had even spread throughout Miracle City, and it had been translated into many versions and circulated in various countries. The origin of this legend came from Zhongzhou State. Various adaptations, remakes, and biographies were everywhere. It was a household name. Even children as young as 3 or 5 years old knew about this legend about King Wei. But no one knew that the protagonist of this legend was King Wei, who was assimilated by the Order Camp in the second stage. People only remembered him by another name. The name that brought him the greatest humiliation. The name that he had after he was assimilated by the Order Camp. It was also because the legend of King Wei had been spread on Earth to this day that everyone knew about it. That was why King Wei was in a weak stage where he was seriously injured but not dead. There were more than 1 billion people in Zhongzhou State. Maybe some people didn't know who the president was, but no one dared to say that they hadn't heard of King Wei's other name. This was also the most crucial reason for King Wei to form a real imprint. And in the middle of the second stage to the third stage. At that time, the majesty of the space-time corridor had not yet reached the peak. Under the circumstances that the first human emperor had fallen, King Wei brazenly returned to the neutral prestige from the Order Camp. He was almost the pillar of the entire human clan at that time. How to let King Wei return to the peak? Let him and Li Tianlan return to the most glorious times, and let those blurred legends return to the past was something that everyone was thinking about. To some extent, it could even be said to be their responsibility. Lin Shi glanced at Wang Tianzong. Looking at his calm but extremely vigilant eyes, he suddenly laughed. Maybe you have guessed something, but it doesn't matter. I just want to tell you that the integration of Wuyo of Beihai, Wuyo of the Lin clan, and Wuyo of His Majesty Li Tianlan is the general trend. You can't stop it. No one can stop it. But it will take a long time. I think you don't have to tell me what your attitude is. When His Highness the Sword Emperor recovers and returns, we will communicate with him about this alone. Chapter 1105. The call was not connected. After a long wait, the other end of the phone indicated that the other party was not in the service area. It was absolutely rare to encounter the other party not in the service area in the capital of Zhongzhou State. Xianyuan Wushang was a little surprised and dialed Li Tianlan's cell phone again. It was still the other party not in the service area. The other side of the room was empty in his perception. Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai were not there. The young couple would not run to the deserted countryside at this time. Xianyuan Wushang thought about it and put down the phone. Xing Tian was still thinking about something. The writing brush appeared in his hand again. Thinking about all the possible variables, Xing Tian raised the brush again and wrote in the air. Considering Mao Song's position, his recent activities will not leave the mansion of the Chen family, and it is impossible for him to hide. But in view of his psychological quality and Chen Shi's years of training, Chen Shi's death will undoubtedly torture his spirit. He will feel guilty, uneasy, and regret. He will also have a distorted sense of expectation for the future. If his mental state is extremely unstable, then in the next very short time, he will inevitably reveal some flaws, and then some clues will be found. Mao Song's situation will soon be noticed, and he will be. The tip of the brush paused. Instead of writing a specific name, Xing Tian wrote, he will be controlled by the people of Emperor Dong's palace. Suffering from mental torture, he will not be able to bear too much pressure, and will confess what he did as soon as possible. The parliament will believe Mao Song's testimony, because there is no flaw in the logic, And this is the truth. There is an undeniable fact. There is no love between Lin Yin and Qin Weibai. For Qin Weibai, there is only fear. Lin Yin only had fear, but after countless careful schemes, as a relatively weak woman, the possibility of Lin Yin falling in love with Mao Song was very high. Out of longing, uneasiness, and other psychological reasons, after Chen Shi's death, Lin Yin, who roughly understands the situation and considers herself an outsider, will appear in Yuzhou and appear beside Mao Song. The tip of the brush paused and continued. The absolute strength of Emperor Dong's palace will destroy Lin Yin, right? Her fear, desperate situation, and Mao Song's situation will make her return to the psychological state of a normal woman, plus some special reasons. Phoenix Pavilion, Gu Xingyun, Qin Weibai, will appear in front of the parliament. The parliament will. Gotcha. The incorporeal brush let out a crisp cracking sound, and faintly discernible cracks began to appear. Xing Tian's face changed slightly. Once again, he condensed a writing brush in the air, erased the word definitely, and continued to write. The parliament will probably be attracted by Mao Song and Lin Yin, and then turn its attention to Kunlun City and Huang. This will cause some unknown change in the council's mentality. The brush stopped. Then it disappeared completely. Xianyuan Wushang, who was watching with great interest, paused and then asked, "What changes?" "Unknown changes," Xing Tian said after a moment of silence. Xianyuan Wushang tilted his head and looked expressionlessly at Xing Tian. "That's it. You've been writing for half a day, and what's the ending? Are you a eunuch? I can't write it." Xing Tian's tone was calm. Xianyuan Wushang was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Not bad. In the real environment of Miracle City, it involved Li Tianlan, Jiang Shangyu, and the parliament of Zhongzhou State. It was normal that Xing Tian couldn't write it. In fact, everything he did today was vaguely beyond his authority. After learning about Phoenix Pavilion and Jiang Shangyu, the mentality of the parliament would definitely change. However, such a change, because it hadn't happened yet, so they had no way to know. But thinking about it carefully, such a change should not be a bad thing after all. Now that the framework of the matter had been written by Xing Tian, it was only to see how things would develop in the end. No matter how it developed next, it would be much better than before. "It's getting more and more lively." Xianyuan Wushang sighed softly. "I've seen similar situations in the early days of the space-time corridor. Now no one has the mood to do so. When there is no external threat that cannot be resisted, the so-called struggle, no matter how cruel, seems very childish." Xing Tian was silent and did not speak. Xianyuan Wushang stretched himself and stood up. He glanced at Xing Tian. "What do you want to eat?" "Anything is fine." Xing Tian's voice was simple and honest. In Xianyuan Wushang's sight, Xing Tian's huge and thick legs had almost turned into nothingness. Under the shining light, only the faint, almost transparent shadows of his legs could be seen. Obviously, Xing Tian was not suitable to go out in this state. Xianyuan Wushang nodded. After thinking for a while, he took out a large bucket of purified water from somewhere. "Eat this." Xianyuan Wushang handed the purified water to Xing Tian. Xing Tian's face changed slightly, and then he became a little excited. His huge hand that took the purified water trembled slightly. "Thank you, Your Highness." Xianyuan Wushang waved his hand and turned to leave the room. The cafeteria of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel was crowded in the evening. Xianyuan Wushang picked some food in the cafeteria and found a corner to eat slowly. This prince of the space-time corridor wasn't harmless at all when he ate. Especially when he was alone, his entire person looked exceptionally serious. "Can I sit here?" A gentle voice with a hint of a smile suddenly rang out. The man, who looked to be in his 40s or 50s, smiled at Xianyuan Wushang. He seemed to be a middle-aged executive of a company who came to Yuzhou for a business trip. He wore gold-rimmed glasses, a white shirt, a dark tie, a watch, trousers, leather shoes, and immaculate hair. He smiled politely and looked elegant. "Whatever." Xianyuan Wushang nodded and ate the food in front of him without looking up. The middle-aged man didn't seem to think that the fat man in front of him was rude. He sat quietly in front of Xianyuan Wushang. He crossed his fingers, sat upright, and looked at Xianyuan Wushang with a smile, without taking anything from him. Do you know me? Xianyuan Wushang asked casually and licked the oil stains on his fingers. No, I don't. The middle-aged man smiled and shook his head. But I really want to know you. The entire Yuzhou knew that His Majesty Li Tianlan suddenly had two mysterious figures around him, who could be taken into the Bai family and go to the Qin family together. Based on this alone, it could be seen that His Majesty Li Tianlan trusted Your Excellency. Believe me, there are many people in Yuzhou who don't know you, but there are many who want to know you. There are 547 people in the cafeteria right now. About 1/3 of them have observed me without batting an eyelid. Are they the people who want to get to know me? But they live here and come here to eat. But more than that, they want to know my brother and sister-in-law, right? Xianyuan Wushang smiled carelessly. Maybe. But in my opinion, you are also worth making friends with. He stretched out his hand to Xianyuan Wushang and said with a smile, Zhao Qiming, what's your name? You are more direct than them. Xianyuan Wushang said lightly. But I don't like to be direct. From your attitude, I can feel that you are alert and testing me. He raised his greasy hand and wiped it on the middle-aged man's sleeve, wiping his saliva and oil stains on it. He fully expressed his dissatisfaction. My name is Xianyuan Wushang. Tell me what you want. Zhao Qiming's expression was a little stiff. He didn't know whether it was because of the content of Xianyuan Wushang's words or his actions, or both. He took a deep look at Xianyuan Wushang, slowly sat down and pondered. He was undoubtedly a very steady person. Even though Xianyuan Wushang's attitude was somewhat unexpected, he was just a little more cautious. Other than that, he didn't show anything else. Xianyuan Wushang's eyes were a little playful. How do you think the current Wang family of Beihai compares to Emperor Dong's palace? The middle-aged man asked softly after a moment of silence. You work for Wang Shengxiao? Direct, simple, sharp, and even a little rude. Xianyuan Wushang asked directly. A lot of words that Zhao Qiming had prepared suddenly got stuck in his throat. He felt a little uncomfortable. After 2 seconds, he said in a low voice, I am indeed serving the Wang family of Beihai. What does he want you to do? Xianyuan Wushang's tone was very calm, but it was extremely rude to control the conversation. The corner of Zhao Qiming's mouth twitched uncontrollably. This was completely different from the conversation he had imagined. There was no probing, no roundabout, no temptation, nothing at all. In a few words, the other party directly talked about the topic to the point where there was no room for discussion. He could already imagine what would happen next. He made an invitation. The other party refused. Then the conversation was over. In a few words, it was really just a few words. But the conversation shouldn't be like this. Zhao Qiming kept taking deep breaths, and his smile began to become reluctant. Well, if possible, we hope that you can join the Wang family of Beihai. But I can promise that the Wang family of Beihai will give you double the treatment you enjoy in Emperor Dong's palace. And, you work for Wang Shengxiao? Xianyuan Wushang asked again. Zhao Qiming was stunned. He forced himself to calm down and said, Yes. You're not. Xianyuan Wushang laughed and said, Wang Shengxiao now has a more important partner. Even if he doesn't know my identity, his partner always knows. No matter how stupid he is, he won't let you invite me to join the Wang family of Beihai. Do you understand what I mean? After a pause, he laughed again and said, I just want a small clinic, or an infirmary in Emperor Dong's palace. Double it for me? 2 clinics? That's really tempting. Zhao Qiming had no time to think about what Xianyuan Wushang had said before, or he didn't want to think about it. Hearing the second half of Xianyuan Wushang's words, he instinctively said, If you have any other requirements, we can talk about it. The Wang family of Beihai has passed the crisis and will inevitably rule the dark world again in the future. If Emperor Dong's palace only gives you a small clinic, what's the point of staying in such a Emperor Dong's palace? The Wang family of Beihai is very sincere. Why do you stay with Dong Huang and help the wicked do evil? Help the wicked do evil. When Zhao Qiming said this word, he deliberately emphasized it, and there was a flash of nervousness in his eyes. He really didn't work for Wang Shengxiao, but the problem was that he didn't know who worked for him on Earth. He just received the commission to contact Xianyuan Wushang, and the condition of the commissioning party was very simple. They asked him to invite Xianyuan Wushang to join the Wang family of Beihai. The only strange thing was the word, help the wicked do evil. This was the word that the commissioning party explicitly asked him to say in front of Xianyuan Wushang. Zhao Qiming stared at Xianyuan Wushang's reaction. There was no sudden change of expression, no anger, no sneer. Xianyuan Wushang, who had been smiling faintly, suddenly stopped smiling. He slowly raised his head and looked at Zhao Qiming. His chubby, harmless face was devoid of any expression. This Xianyuan Wushang was strange and dignified. He looked at Zhao Qiming with indifference, as if he was looking at a dead man. Zhao Qiming was almost instantly soaked in cold sweat. His body stiffened and he stared at Xianyuan Wushang's face. Do you know? Xianyuan Wushang wiped the corner of his mouth with a napkin and said unhurriedly. Based on what you said, everyone in my hometown can kill you. Not just you, but your family, your relatives, your friends, your relatives' friends, your friends' friends. Everyone who has even the slightest relationship with you will receive a punishment worse than death. An indescribable chill spread from the soles of his feet to his brain in an instant. Zhao Qiming's breathing suddenly became rapid. You work for Jiang Shangyu. Xianyuan Wushang suddenly laughed. If you work for Wang Shengxiao, he wouldn't dare to let you bring these words to me. Lin Shi wouldn't allow it. Even he doesn't dare to say these words, and neither do I. Whoever says them will die. The higher the status, the more it is so. Only Jiang Shangyu can be a human being without scruples. Obviously, he has given up everything he can give up. Maybe you're innocent. Xianyuan Wushang threw the napkin on the table. But you're guilty. You're guilty. It was like a supreme judgment, indifferent, lofty, majestic, and irresistible. Zhao Qiming's body suddenly twitched violently. In the void, an extremely strong life force directly poured into Zhao Qiming's body. The strong vitality nourished Zhao Qiming's body at an unimaginable speed. All the dirt in his body evaporated in an instant. All the viruses and bacteria were emptied. The toxins accumulated by years of drinking and smoking were completely gone. Some hidden dangers in his body that he hadn't noticed were also completely gone. Zhao Qiming's face was ruddy, energetic, and radiant. The toxins in every drop of blood in his body were completely dispelled by this vitality. It was an abrupt yet extremely comfortable feeling. That vitality was still spreading in his body, healing all the hidden dangers in his body. It continued to spread, burst, and spread. The vitality stimulated every cell in his body. All the cells and blood began to grow after receiving a huge amount of nutrients. His 5 viscera and 6 bowels were frantically absorbing this wisp of vitality. At this moment, in front of Xianyuan Wushang, Zhao Qiming's body was like an inflated balloon, gradually expanding at a speed visible to the naked eye. Zhao Qiming's eyes became extremely frightened. He wanted to speak, but the muscles in his mouth and throat were growing crazily, drowning his tongue, his teeth, and occupying every part of his mouth. Crack! The infinitely growing muscles completely crushed the bones in his body. The growing muscles blocked more and more blood in his body. He began to suffocate. His heart pressed against his chest. The muscles burst his nose and even grew out of his eyes and ears. The extremely disgusting and frightening scene also meant that he was suffering the most extreme pain. Xianyuan Wushang walked away from him expressionlessly. Zhao Qiming, whose body had expanded, staggered and fell to the ground. He couldn't make any sound, but his body was crazily twitching and trembling. Looking at him for the last time, the expressionless Xianyuan Wushang twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered, "Rebel!" Chapter 1106. The silence seemed to last for a moment, but it also seemed to last for thousands of years. Li Tianlan stood silently, like a statue. The ruthless energy shrouded the windbreaker and penetrated into the surface of his body through the windbreaker. Everything seemed to freeze. Only time was hurriedly rushing by. It was like a vast torrent, surging. He stood in the almost eternal waves of time. In an instant, he seemed to have been completely weathered by the power of time. And there was nothing around him. The prosperity of Yuzhou, the dazzling sunshine, the beautiful women, the monstrous power, the absolute force, the lofty world, the sun, the moon, and the stars, everything seemed to be completely broken in an instant. There was nothing in the world. No, the world itself no longer existed. Everything around him became the purest nothingness. Because it was nothingness, it could not be described at all. Because it did not exist, everything he felt became an illusion. Everything in the world lost its meaning. Only that faintly discernible energy was still fusing with him. That energy was like an extremely weak but ancient willpower. It seemed to be trying to tell him something, but the transmission was so vague and weak that Li Tianlan couldn't grasp it at all. One after another, extremely vague pictures flashed in the deepest part of his consciousness. In a trance, Li Tianlan seemed to see a lot of things, but at the same time, he seemed to see nothing. He imprinted all the vague images in his mind. They seemed to be meaningless, but they were more meaningful than anything else. Nothingness was revolving around him. There was only nothingness in the illusion. Only his thoughts were the only reality. His thoughts paused for a second. Under the sun, Li Tianlan suddenly straightened up and took a long breath. The fusion of that energy and ruthlessness had been completed. The gorgeous black windbreaker returned to silence, and was draped over Li Tianlan's body without any abnormality. Li Tianlan looked at everything around him. There were tall and straight pines and cypresses on both sides. The clean and tidy road extended all the way to the villas not far away. Flowers were in full bloom on both sides of the road. Yuzhou was sunny after the snow. The world was vast and prosperous as before. Li Tianlan's pupils contracted slightly. His face was pale, and his breathing began to quicken. Almost in the blink of an eye, he was completely soaked in cold sweat. Li Tianlan squatted down in pain, and reached out to cover his heart. An indescribable fear struck his soul the moment he saw the world around him. He did not know where this fear came from. But in an instant, the fear that spread to the highest point instantly broke down his iron-like willpower. His rapid breathing was followed by an incomparably strong sense of suffocation. His heart was beating wildly. The first heart and the second heart beat at the same time. The huge force shattered the ground under his feet, completely pressing Qin Weibai against the car next to him. He slowly knelt on the ground, covered his chest, and opened his mouth wide. His eyes were unfocused. In his consciousness, a huge sense of impending death surged, as if he would die completely in the next second. Then the fear was gone. Without warning, without the slightest delay, it suddenly disappeared. Li Tianlan knelt on one knee in a daze. He looked at the sky around him, and was silent for a long time. Cold sweat dripped from his face and landed on the ground. He kept taking deep breaths, and his complexion gradually returned to normal. A pair of small hands appeared beside him, and hugged his arm tightly. Li Tianlan turned his head slightly. In his sight, Qin Weibai's face was as pale as snow, and her eyes, which used to be cold and bright, even looked a little empty. "It's okay." Li Tianlan forced a smile. "It's okay." What the hell happened? Qin Weibai's voice was extremely persistent. "Tell me." Li Tian was silent for a full half a minute before shaking his head. "I can't tell." He probably knew why, but he couldn't tell. At that moment he did feel unprecedented fear. This fear could be said to be brought to him by the ruthless energy, but it could also be said to be his own. He couldn't describe that feeling at all. In that moment of trance, he saw a lot of blurred pictures. Those pictures were blurred, and he didn't know what he saw. But Li Tianlan was sure that his fear had absolutely something to do with those pictures. The roar of the engine sounded from afar. In his perception, countless eyes were watching this direction, including the security personnel of the Bai family manor and cameras installed in every corner. Li Tianlan's abnormality had spread throughout the Bai family at the fastest speed. Dongqing Wudi, Bai Zhanfang, Bai Qingzhao, Bai Qingqian, and others all rushed over. Li Tianlan stood up slowly. His movements were slow and even cautious, as if he was avoiding something. Qin Weibai could feel that Li Tianlan was not avoiding her. His movements looked more like he was avoiding the air around him. "Tianlan." Qin Weibai wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. "I'm fine." Li Tianlan shook his head. "I just feel a little uncomfortable." The fear had disappeared. His mind had returned to reason. However, in his incomparably calm thoughts, he felt the oppression of the entire world. Everything seemed to be pressing down on him, as if it wanted to crush him to death here. That sense of oppression was gradually fading. Li Tianlan's face also began to quickly return to normal. Get in the car. Li Tianlan gently hugged Qin Weibai. Holding the exquisite and delicate body in his arms, his heart seemed to have completely calmed down. Li Tianlan lowered his head slightly, bit Qin Weibai's pink ear, and chuckled. Minister, they are all scared. I see Auntie's face is pale. You have to help me explain later. Qin Weibai was stunned and took a deep look at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan didn't realize his problem for a moment. The car was still coming from the depths of the Bai family's manor. It was at least hundreds of meters away from here. Qin Weibai could see the approaching car. The question was, how could Li Tianlan see the person in the car? Li Tianlan's auntie could only be Bai Qingqian. In this case, Bai Qingqian couldn't drive in person. Seeing Bai Qingqian's face directly, how was that possible? Qin Weibai hesitated and didn't ask. She obediently turned around and got in the car. The car drove along the road to the villas inside the manor. The cold wind was blowing the woods in the sun. As the car went away, Lin Shi's figure appeared in the place where Li Tianlan had knelt on the ground. He looked at a small piece of the road that had been shattered, looking serious and thoughtful. Li Tianlan doesn't look good, Wang Shengxiao said slowly. Really? Lin Shi stared at the cracked ground under his feet. What do you think? Obviously, he seems to be frightened by something. But we all know very well that there was nothing around him just now. From this point of view, Li Tianlan's mental state may have some problems. In layman's terms, maybe he has been possessed by the devil. Wang Shengxiao said lightly. I agree with your first sentence. Lin Shi nodded. Obviously, His Majesty Li Tianlan was indeed frightened by something. But I don't agree with your second inference. Maybe you don't know that His Majesty Li Tianlan is a god. There is no so-called qi deviation, and it is impossible for him to be contaminated and assimilated. He was indeed frightened by something. But there was nothing around him. Was he frightened by Qin Weibai? Wang Shengxiao questioned bluntly. When he said that he was frightened by Qin Weibai, he couldn't help laughing. If this was true, he really couldn't imagine how deformed Li Tianlan's aesthetic concept would be. Of course, it was not Her Highness Qin Weibai. Lin Shi said flatly. I don't agree with you that there was nothing around him. On the contrary, I think at that moment there was something around him that we couldn't see. Deliberately mystifying. Wang Shengxiao sneered disdainfully. His tolerance for Lin Shi's various behaviors seemed to have reached the limit. There was obviously nothing. Maybe there was nothing. But what if the perspective was different? Lin Shi suddenly said. His arms suddenly glowed faintly. Messages from the apostles came one after another. A virtual screen formed in front of Lin Shi. The information that flowed on the screen wasn't some data, nor was it some information. Instead, it was faces. There were white people, black people, and yellow people. Old people, children, women, men, of all ages, of all races, all faces. The only thing they had in common was that these faces were all extremely panicked and frightened. Did you notice? Lin Shi looked at these faces and suddenly said. The last picture of the apostles was also sent. It was Li Tianlan's extremely frightened expression at that moment. Li Tianlan's expression was lined up with the faces around him. Wang Shengxiao suddenly felt a little strange, but he didn't know what was strange about it. He observed carefully, and the more he looked, the more he felt that these people's expressions were highly similar. These people's expressions are similar? Wang Shengxiao frowned and replied. According to the analysis of the apostles, these expressions are as high as 96% similar. But at that moment, His Majesty Li Tianlan's expression was more distorted, which shows that he suffered more fear. What else did you notice? Lin Shi asked. What? Wang Shengxiao was a little confused. Environment. Lin Shi took a deep breath and said. Didn't you notice that these people, except for His Majesty Li Tianlan, are all in very narrow and enclosed spaces like elevators and secret rooms? His Majesty Li Tianlan is the only exception. Wang Shengxiao stopped breathing. In an instant he realized what was so strange about this photo wall. Indeed, everyone was in an environment similar to a secret room. But in this photo of Li Tianlan he was surrounded by sunlight, woods, and a vast open environment. What on earth do you want to say? Wang Shengxiao looked at Lin Shi and asked seriously. These people are all patients, and they have the same disease. Lin Shi said expressionlessly. And His Majesty Li Tianlan's expression analysis and the heartbeat frequency at that moment are highly similar to these people. We are very sure that His Majesty Li Tianlan also has the same disease as them. What disease? Wang Shengxiao didn't know why he felt a little uneasy. Claustrophobia. Lin Shi said indifferently. Claustrophobia, claustrophobia. Wang Shengxiao looked at the sky around him. He looked at the vast world and the jungle around him. Just now Li Tianlan stood in this extremely open environment, and then he suddenly got claustrophobia? Wang Shengxiao looked at Lin Shi seriously and said, "Are you kidding me?" Chapter 1107. Wang Shengxiao's voice was not very loud, but it was full of extreme absurdity and mockery. Let's not talk about whether Li Tianlan had the so-called claustrophobia before. There was no telling what the probability of him suddenly suffering from claustrophobia was. Right in front of him, right in the Bai family's manor, there was nothing that could make him claustrophobic. This manor of Bai clan was close to a mountain and a river. It covered about 6,000 square meters. It was magnificent. Having such a manor being close to a scenic spot in Yuzhou province represented more than identity and social status. For many years, Bai Zhanfang had served as the speaker of Yuzhou. He and Wu Zhengmin, the current deputy prime minister of the cabinet, could be said to be the two oldest members of parliament in Zhongzhou state. In terms of seniority, Bai Zhanfang had the most seniority among all the members of parliament. People from all walks of Yuzhou who were dissatisfied with the Bai family had privately mentioned the topic of the Bai family occupying a mountain to be the king, but Bai Zhanfang had always been unmoved. Now, with the appearance of Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace, the strong rise of the giant group had been extremely obvious. However, it was said that the manor was going to expand. This was no longer important. Even if it didn't expand now, it was still a manor of nearly 2,000 acres, which was close to the size of 2 forbidden palaces. The buildings here were sparse and arranged in picturesque disorder. The view could be said to be extremely wide. Claustrophobia? The current situation was almost equivalent to Li Tianlan standing on a boundless prairie, but suddenly felt that the vast prairie was like a large suitcase, and he was out of breath in the suitcase. How absurd was that? But Lin Shi said it very seriously. Wang Shengxiao's face was cold. His dissatisfaction with Lin Shi was almost undisguised. The cooperation between the two sides hadn't officially begun yet, but the Wang family of Beihai had already paid the price of the divine martial corps of the non-continent. Although the change of ownership of hundreds of thousands of troops didn't seem to have much impact in a short time, the actual impact could not be ignored. What did Lin Shi do? He said he would deal with Li Tianlan. But Wang Shengxiao did not feel a trace of hostility from him to Li Tianlan. On the contrary, what made him absent-minded was that he felt that Lin Shi's respect for Li Tianlan had always been full. There was no definite action to deal with Li Tianlan. He also didn't take any action to treat his father. The other party used an extremely magical ability to take him around the world, study the energy of murderous weapons, and secretly observe Li Tianlan's every move. Now he was even in a daze at the footprints he left, saying that he had claustrophobia. Wang Shengxiao felt that the other party was talking nonsense, and he was always talking about inexplicable topics. Hostility? Wang Shengxiao did not feel it at all. Lin Shi's respect for Li Tianlan was obvious. The man and the woman, the apostle and the saint, talked about Li Tianlan like fanatics talking about their god, with fanatical faces. Gritting his teeth, Wang Shengxiao watched Lin Shi ponder over Li Tianlan's footprints and the cracked floor. An idea suddenly came to his mind. If saint and apostle were here, would they kneel down and kiss the footprints left by Li Tianlan? The thought was not funny at all. Wang Shengxiao felt a burst of irritation at the thought. The only thing he could comfort himself now was that the plan for treating his father that Saint came up with now was thought to be miraculous by the elites of the Wang family of Beihai's biological laboratory after a simple combination. But it was just a plan, like a candy to comfort him. As for when it would be sent to him, all he could do was wait. I never make any jokes. While Wang Shengxiao was thinking, Lin Shi's cold voice rang out. So, Wang Shengxiao sneered and said, Do you really think that Li Tianlan is likely to have claustrophobia in this environment? You saw the fact, didn't you? Lin Shi asked in reply. What I saw was that Li Tianlan was not in a good state, not some damn claustrophobia. His Majesty just said that he was a little uncomfortable. Lin Shi's voice was calm. Wang Shengxiao took a deep breath and slightly narrowed his eyes. If you still want to talk about these topics, then maybe we don't need to talk anymore. I'm very busy, and I don't have time to waste with you. In fact, I'm not only wasting time here, but you've even interrupted my action. Your plan of action is wrong. Lin Shi said bluntly. In fact, confirming His Majesty's current state is the most important thing. You cannot believe the claustrophobia, and I don't want to believe it either. But if it's true, it will be a disaster for you and any of His Majesty's enemies. Disaster? Wang Xingxiao's eyes were cold and gloomy. Disaster. Lin Shi said calmly. He can kill anyone anywhere, at any time, in any way, and no one will notice it. No one can guard against it. He can take away your life like taking away a feather. The invincible realm, the peak of the invincible realm, and the so-called chosen one have no power to fight back, because you don't know anything at all. The moment he makes a move, you're already dead. What is this? Ghost? God. Wang Shengxiao felt more and more ridiculous. If he had this strength, he would have conquered the world long ago. He doesn't now. Lin Shi shook his head. But there are signs. Because of your so-called claustrophobia? Wang Shengxiao didn't know what tone he should use to speak. I know you can't understand. Lin Shi glanced at him and said, the manner you see is really vast, but maybe the world will be different in front of him. He suddenly waved his hand and asked, do you remember in Emperor Dong's palace? Wang Shengxiao froze for a moment. The current monitoring system of Emperor Dong's palace can't be hacked, but it doesn't mean that we can't get the detailed information of your battle with His Majesty in Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Shi looked into his eyes. Maybe you forgot, maybe you haven't thought about it, or maybe you don't dare to think about it. But I can remind you. Where were you when His Majesty woke up in Emperor Dong's palace? Where was your battlefield? Wang Shengxiao's face suddenly changed, and his expression became a little ugly. Obviously, he didn't need Lin Shi to remind him. It was a question he didn't want to think about at all. He knew the answer to this question very well. At the moment when Li Tianlan woke up, he was in Li Tianlan's bedroom. Their battlefield was in Emperor Dong's palace. His time in the bedroom was very short. It wasn't a good process. At that time, Li Tianlan just raised his hand and slapped him out of the bedroom. But the problem was, Wang Shengxiao was very sure that there was no door in Li Tianlan's bedroom that could directly lead to the outside. At that time, he was surrounded by the bedroom walls. The outside world was a corridor, and the edge of the corridor was also a wall. But those walls were not damaged. At that time, when Li Tianlan slapped him, his whole body seemed to suddenly become transparent and pass through the wall. When the wall was intact, he appeared on the lawn of Emperor Dong's palace. This matter was completely incomprehensible. Wang Shengxiao didn't even dare to think about what it meant. Do you know what's going on? Wang Shengxiao carefully recalled the feeling at that moment. At that moment, he didn't touch any obstacles, but he was directly slapped out by Li Tianlan. The more he thought about that scene, the more terrified he felt. I'm not sure, and I don't need to tell you. Lin Shi said lightly. The contemplative look in his eyes became more and more obvious. He thought about the original era shrouded in boundless fog. At that time, there was only the space-time corridor. There was no war god realm, no human palace. There were very few records about the original era. Most of the things had become legends. As for the original His Majesty, the extremely limited information now could only prove that he existed. And such an existence was largely confirmed by the Majesty in the space-time corridor. There were almost no detailed and accurate records of that era, which was almost completely submerged in the fog of time. Most of what was left were legends. The relic gradually became conscious, and the memories began to fade. Therefore, the seniority in the space-time corridor was extremely chaotic. Now, everyone knew who the Majesty in the space-time corridor was, but no one could be sure who he was. It wasn't just him. Even the god of war, and the human emperor of the great imperial palace hadn't figured out where they came from. Perhaps they couldn't figure it out anymore, because they had already forgotten too many things. What they could remember was their return this time. The legends were chaotic. But some things could always be confirmed. For example, the original Majesty. He did exist. As the most important pioneer of the neutral camp, without him, there would be no today's human clan. There was no doubt about that. He opened the neutral camp, so naturally, he was the strongest in the history of the neutral camp. This so-called strongest, at least for today, was the strongest without a doubt. Among the peak combat powers of the neutral camp, the war god and the human emperor together were no match for the Majesty in the space-time corridor. And the Majesty in the space-time corridor had not been able to surpass the original human emperor. As the son of the war god and regarded as the future successor of the war god, Lin Shi was qualified to know a lot of things. He vaguely heard his father mention that the current Majesty in the space-time corridor had surpassed the original human emperor in terms of authority, and was not far behind in terms of authority. The reason why he could not reach the height of the original human emperor was because of his perspective. Lin Shi had a hard time understanding this word, but he had always kept it in mind, because when the original human emperor was still alive, he would often say, "This world is very crowded. It's a little uncomfortable." Perspective. This word was crucial, but it was also too broad. Lin Shi had a hard time understanding what the world was like from the other's perspective. Perspective. Or maybe this was the biggest secret of the original Majesty, who was the top of the three camps. These core members had speculated about this, but as long as they mentioned it, whether it was right or wrong, they would soon forget it. But now, Lin Shi suddenly found that in Miracle City, when he began to think about this problem again, his memory was exceptionally clear. Perspective. Perspective. He seemed to have thought of something. It was not difficult for the technical level of the war god's realm to figure out the principle, but the difficult part was that there was no way to do it. He wanted to record it down and send it out, but the moment he sent a message to the apostle, the thought in his mind suddenly disappeared inexplicably. Lin Shi was stunned and then smiled bitterly. "I have an idea that may prove my guess," Lin Shi said thoughtfully, "but I need your cooperation." "How?" Wang Shengxiao asked directly. Lin Shi threw Wang Shengxiao a strange-looking pistol and pointed to the central villa in the group of villas ahead. Across the road, the woods, the flower beds, the artificial lake, and the villas. It was a distance of thousands of meters. Lin Shi said, "Aim there and shoot." "Are you sure?" Wang Shengxiao frowned. At such a distance, shooting wouldn't do anything, but the gunshot would undoubtedly alarm many people. In the current situation, this was definitely not a good thing. "Give it a try," Lin Shi said. "His Majesty should have some instinctive reaction. This can also let you see if I'm talking nonsense." Wang Shengxiao thought for a moment. Suddenly, he raised his hand and aimed the gun at the central villa. Almost at the same time, in the living room of the central villa, Li Tianlan put down the teacup in his hand. Changed. Everything in front of him changed in an incredible and indescribable way in a trance. Everything became a complete hole in front of his eyes. The distance was shrinking and shrinking at will. Li Tianlan didn't realize this at all. He just stretched out his hand casually and grabbed forward. Crack. On the road of the manor, Wang Shengxiao watched a palm suddenly appear in front of him. It was silent, without warning, and there was no way to guard against it. The palm suddenly grabbed his pistol when he was about to shoot. A huge force burst out. Wang Shengxiao, who was unprepared, had no time to react. His finger, which was about to pull the trigger, was instantly torn off by the huge force. Blood gushed out. The palm in front of him held his pistol and finger, and disappeared directly in front of him. In the living room, Li Tianlan withdrew his palm and looked at the pistol and a broken finger that appeared in his hand. He was a little confused. The little nanny beside him exclaimed and took a few steps back with a pale face. Everyone was stunned and looked at the things in Li Tianlan's hand in astonishment. That moment just now was like magic. Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and grabbed a pistol, and a finger dripping with blood without any pause. The living room was quiet. On the road of the manor, Wang Shengxiao, whose face was livid because of the sharp pain, roared in disbelief. What's going on? Do you believe it now? Lin Shi narrowed his eyes tightly and looked extremely shocked. You should be glad that His Majesty just reacted instinctively. If he found the feeling, he could easily take away your brain and your heart. You wouldn't feel anything, and your body wouldn't even have a little wound. He just stretched out his hand, and then you stood here, intact, and then your brain suddenly disappeared completely. Are you telling me a fairy tale? Wang Shengxiao's face was gloomy and twisted. Lin Shi smiled faintly. In a sense, this is science. It can even be explained by your current science. But I don't need to explain it to you. Wang Shengxiao stared at Lin Shi silently, and didn't speak for a long time. He couldn't figure out why, but he already believed Lin Shi's words. That moment just now was too strange. If Li Tianlan had consciously wanted to kill him, his martial arts would have been almost useless. But now he was already dead. Bang! In the living room of the villa, Li Tianlan threw the pistol and finger on the tea table. He looked up at the villa in front of him. Everything was normal. The change just now inexplicably disappeared again. It was an indescribable feeling. The moment he stretched out his hand, the extreme fear once again impacted his will. In a short moment, cold sweat appeared on his forehead again. Tianlan, what's going on? Dongqing Wudi looked at the finger and the pistol on the tea table, and then looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan shook his head in confusion. After a while he whispered, I also want to know. Chapter 1108. Li Tianlan's bewilderment was genuine. His mind became extremely chaotic. The world in front of him seemed to be constantly overlapping. The feeling of oppression in his heart was still clear, and it began to fade with the passage of time. The world was really narrow. It was so narrow that it was almost suffocating. This so-called narrowness was not a relative sense of vastness, but a perception from the perspective. Li Tianlan couldn't use any words to describe what he felt at that moment. That absurd, shocking, ecstatic, and frightening perspective seemed to appear for a moment, and then suddenly disappear. If it weren't for the finger, the pistol, and the blood on the coffee table, Li Tianlan would even think that the moment just now was an illusion. Now that he thought about it carefully, he couldn't even clearly describe what he felt at that moment. In that less than half a second, or less than a second, the world overlapped. To be exact, it could not be said to be overlapping. But Li Tianlan couldn't use other words to describe that scene at all. His eyes saw a lot of three-dimensional images. Every picture was the world in front of him, this villa, this manor. But it was more than what he saw. He couldn't describe it. He saw more than what his eyes could see. Just now, Qin Weibai was sitting next to him, and Dongqing Wudi was in front of him. At the moment when the world overlapped, he saw Dongqing Wudi facing him. At the same time, he also saw Dongqing Wudi's back and sides. Everything, a huge amount of information, and endless details. The whole world seemed to be presented in the most complete form in front of Li Tianlan. He could see every position of every person in every different direction in the room, and he could even clearly see their internal organs, bones, and blood vessels. This was not X-ray vision. It was a kind of... All the pictures were mixed together and appeared completely in front of Li Tianlan. The skin of the people around him was not damaged in any way, and Li Tianlan did not have the so-called X-ray vision function. In that perspective, they still existed, but all the organs in their bodies existed with their bodies at the same time. Countless pictures were completely juxtaposed together. It was not just people. The sofa, the wall, the TV. At that moment, what appeared in front of Li Tianlan was not only the TV screen, but also the back of the TV behind the TV screen. The parts inside the TV and the TV screen existed at the same time. What he saw was not only the wall in front of him, but also the manor outside the wall. Everything that came into contact with his eyes was displayed in the most three-dimensional way. It was completely different from X-ray vision. It was the most intuitive change of perspective. The entire manor became a three-dimensional image, and the images connected the countless three-dimensional images together, finally forming a magnificent and extremely strange image. In this picture, Li Tianlan saw the pistol aimed at the main villa. It was far away, but close at the same time. They seemed to be two figures, but they were extremely blurry. Li Tianlan couldn't see their faces, But in Li Tianlan's eyes, their images were also three-dimensional. The two of them were like two standard three-dimensional images. Their bodies, their organs, their brains, their hearts, their blood vessels, all of them. They were neatly juxtaposed in the picture. It was the first time that Li Tianlan had seen this kind of picture. The picture in his sight turned into a massive amount of information that impacted his will. He was a little stunned. His instinctive reaction was to casually reach out his hand. Then he sat on the sofa of the villa and took the pistol and the finger from an unknown distance. This feeling was indescribable, because in the image he saw, the other party's fingers were indeed holding the gun. But among the countless juxtaposed and showing thousands of details, there was a three-dimensional image in which the finger and the pistol existed separately. That was to say, the finger and the pistol were separate images, and they were not connected to other fingers. This was just a very subtle detail. Li Tianlan also instinctively took advantage of this detail. So he reached out, took the gun, and took the finger down by the way. He took it. He took it easily. He didn't feel that he was breaking the finger. The finger and the pistol were like separate objects placed separately in that picture. He just took it. After he calmed down a little, the blurred picture became clear in his memory again. Li Tianlan was in a trance, because when he saw the two blurred figures, he saw not only the pistol and the finger. Beside the two of them, their hearts, brains, and all their vital parts appeared in different three-dimensional images. That feeling was exactly the same as the feeling when he saw the pistol and the finger. In other words, Li Tianlan was 100% sure that if he didn't take the pistol but the heart, he would directly take the other party's heart out of the other party's body. Take things out of his pocket. The other party would lose the heart, but there wouldn't even be any wound left on the body. Li Tianlan shuddered a little. What this meant was self-evident. It meant that if he could have that kind of vision for a long time, in that bizarre vision, he could take anything at will. It was to take, for example, a skyscraper towering into the sky. When all the details appeared in front of him, he could easily find the weakest point. Just take away a steel bar, and the whole building would collapse in an instant. Another example, killing. Killing? There was no such concept. Within his field of vision, even if it was thousands of miles away, through the video, through the screen, as long as he could see, everything about the other party would appear in front of him. Politicians, rich people, and even the so-called chosen one. As long as he could see, he could directly take away the other party's brain or heart without even using any force. Such a perspective, such an ability, he was like a real god. His brain began to twitch slightly, and the feeling of depression continued. Li Tianlan's face was a little ugly, and he subconsciously rubbed his forehead. The amount of information he had received in that instant was too much for him to bear. If a normal person had suddenly received that information, they might have completely broken down. What made him most uncomfortable was the sense of contrast. The magical perspective just now only lasted for less than a second. But when the perspective turned back, everything he saw became extremely depressed. It was like suddenly seeing the real world, even if it was only for a second. But when he returned to the illusion again, everything was a little uncomfortable. But now his perspective was the perspective of a normal person. What was the perspective of a normal person? That was to look at anyone, any object, could only see the side that was facing his line of sight. With a normal perspective, it was impossible to see the back of an object through the side in front of you, let alone a real three-dimensional view. When Dongqing Wudi was facing him in front of him, he could only see the front of the other party, but he could not see the back of Dongqing Wudi in any case. But in that second, Dongqing Wudi in his sight was absolutely three-dimensional, absolutely comprehensive, with thousands of details displayed in front of Li Tianlan at the same time. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead hard, and even closed his eyes. A sword energy was suddenly released from his side. The sword energy turned into a ring and quickly rushed out of the villa, covering the entire manor in the blink of an eye. The place where the two figures existed in his memory was already empty. Li Tianlan subconsciously wanted to chase, but after moving his body, he suddenly realized what he had overlooked. Distance. He actually ignored the distance. With his speed, this distance might not be far, but it was not no distance at all. When he subconsciously wanted to chase after her, He didn't consider this point at all. This was also the sense of confusion caused by the change of perspective. He looked at the pistol and fingers on the coffee table, and was silent for a long time. The feeling of being like a god just now did not disappear, but became more and more clear. Li Tianlan could be sure again that it was not his illusion. In that perspective, the so-called distance existed, but it also didn't exist. In that perspective, Li Tianlan was sitting in Yuzhou. If someone was in Star State, in Europe, in Tiannan, or even in the polar region, as long as someone appeared in the video, then no matter how far away they were, Li Tianlan only needed to reach out and take away the other party's brain or heart at will. If this was not enough to make him a god, what if Li Tianlan suddenly had power far beyond what he had now? When his vision was infinitely far away and the whole planet was in his field of vision, could he easily destroy a planet? This question could not be verified at all for the time being. But in such a perspective, there was no need for verification to kill. In this indescribable perspective, the distance was real. And at the same time as the distance was real, was the direction. In the countless pictures composed of countless three-dimensional images, the so-called direction was no longer just the front, back, left, and right. There were countless, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, and even more directions. These directions did not exist in the perspective of a normal person. But in that perspective, it was extremely clear. At the same distance, a certain direction might make the distance between 2 points infinitely far, like the end of the world. But in another direction, the originally infinitely far distance would be instantly shortened, and it would be close at hand. So Li Tianlan suddenly began to think. When countless directions were completely juxtaposed in front of him, the so-called distance was the distance between 2 points. The countless distances between countless points could be very far or very close. Then, how big was the so-called world, the place where they were living now? Chapter 1109. Dongqing Wudi had a lot to say, but he didn't say anything in the end. After the incredible scene in the living room, everyone could see that Li Tianlan was in a bad state. No one knew how bad it was, but the extremely severe headache and depression almost broke Li Tianlan's will. Li Tianlan didn't have dinner. He went directly to the room that the Bai family had already prepared for him, and fell asleep almost as soon as he lay down. He was dizzy and in a trance. Li Tianlan had a dream all night. There were all kinds of bizarre pictures in the dream. His perception of his own position was sparse and difficult to refute. He didn't know where he was in the dream. All he could see was holy light and battleships all over the sky. It was like a mythical world shrouded in technology, or a super-modern world shrouded in myths. The content of the dream had no continuity. It was almost a constantly rotating picture without any connection, but it appeared in the dream as a matter of course. Perhaps influenced by the conversation of Xianyuan Wushang not long ago, a huge cross even appeared in his dream. The fairy tales that he had heard from his grandfather when he was a child also began to appear. The list of deification, the journey to the west, Sun Wukong, Hoi shooting the sun, and so on. His thoughts were completely free in the dream. The pictures flickered without beginning or end. When he opened his eyes, there was already a hazy light outside the window. A pair of soft and delicate hands gently scratched his scalp. Her movements were gentle, and a delicate fragrance floated. A pair of dreamy and bright eyes appeared in Li Tianlan's sight. From the dream to reality, this pair of bright eyes seemed to be a clear bridge. In a moment of trance, Li Tianlan seemed to see the sky full of stars. "You're awake." Seeing him open his eyes, Qin Weibai smiled slightly. Li Tianlan grunted in a low voice, and the messy dream quickly faded away. Li Tianlan rubbed his forehead and took a deep breath. His head was still a little uncomfortable, but Li Tianlan could completely ignore this degree of discomfort. Although the depression in his heart still existed. As the night passed, the pictures he saw before began to become blurred. When the perspective returned to normal, he seemed to become normal. "What time is it?" Li Tianlan asked, playing with Qin Weibai's hair. "It's nearly 10 o'clock. Qin Weibai shook her head. Her hair brushed past Li Tianlan's face, tickling him. "You slept for nearly 14 hours. I'm tired." Li Tianlan laughed at himself and said, "I had a dream all night, and it was all messy." The scene in the dream gradually became blurry and almost completely disappeared. Li Tianlan seemed to think of something and laughed. I dreamed that Sun Wukong and Buddha had a falling out in fighting. They were even driving a plane to fight against each other. In the dream, I actually felt that it was normal. Qin Weibai also smiled, but her smile was a little unnatural. Dream, she had been dreaming recently. But it was different from Li Tianlan's absurd dream. Her dreams were filled with an extreme regularity and normality. The absurdity and abnormality of the dream were actually the most normal. Qin Weibai's normality was the biggest abnormality. Every time she entered her dream, she would appear in an incomparably vast starry sky. Galaxies and star clusters would constantly appear, and large numbers of stars would explode and fall. Her dream had become a TV series that was related to but not very closely related to the real world, and it would always continue. Qin Weibai was also continuing, looking for her garden, looking for the black giant tree, and looking for the almost transparent figure under the giant tree. In her dream, she had incredible power. That was a dream. The power to make it real. No matter what she needed, with a flash of thought, everything in her imagination could become a reality in the dream. Spaceships, superluminal warships, superluminal interstellar fleets, star cluster level scanning radars, various civilizations all over the starry sky. A lot of things appeared out of thin air in her imagination, and even she didn't know what to call them. In just a few days, in the continuous dream every night, Qin Weibai had already owned countless superluminal interstellar fleets that could travel across the starry sky. If all the numbers were added up, Qin Weibai had calculated that the number had exceeded 6 trillion. Not 6 trillion warships, but 6 trillion fleets. Each fleet had the ability to search a galaxy. But under the vast starry sky in the dream, she wanted to find what she was looking for, but it was still like looking for a needle in a haystack. Qin Weibai didn't tell Li Tianlan about all this. She didn't know why. Every time she wanted to say it, there would be an indescribable fear in her heart. The moment she opened her mouth, the fear would directly occupy her consciousness, freeze her soul, and make her fall into an unprecedented state of despair. Dream. This was originally a very normal thing, but now it had become the most sensitive thing for Qin Weibai. Not feeling well? Li Tianlan glanced at Qin Weibai and touched her forehead. No. Qin Weibai blinked and reached out to pinch Li Tianlan's nose. If you hadn't tortured me last night, I wouldn't have slept so soundly. Li Tianlan sat up with a smile. Are you hungry? Dad and the others went to the meeting. I told Mom to prepare lunch now. She said she would make soup for you last night, but she was still busy in the middle of the night. It should be ready to drink now. Qin Weibai took the pajamas and put them on for Li Tianlan. Her action of helping Li Tianlan put on his clothes was natural. The tone of her voice was also natural. Dad. Mom. Li Tianlan's body was a little stiff. He suddenly didn't know what to say. The parents that Qin Weibai mentioned could only be Dongqing Wudi and Bai Qingqian. It couldn't be anyone else. This feeling was indescribable. What's wrong? Don't you like me calling them that? Qin Weibai tied the gown for Li Tianlan and asked carefully. No. Li Tianlan's voice was a little complicated. They are very happy. Qin Weibai took Li Tianlan's hand and stood up. Whether as a daughter-in-law or a goddaughter, I can call them Mom and Dad. If you don't like it, then I'll be their goddaughter. If you like it, I'll be your daughter-in-law. She looked at Li Tianlan with bright eyes. Do you like it? Li Tianlan was silent for a long time, then smiled and said, Did the minister go to the meeting? Yes. Taking a deep look at him, Qin Weibai nodded. She seemed to suddenly think of something and continued. By the way, when Dad left he didn't look good. Council meeting? Li Tianlan frowned. Plenary meeting. Qin Weibai said softly. Li Tianlan paused and didn't speak. At this level, there were some rules about what kind of meeting it was. The council meeting referred to a small-scale meeting among the 9 council members. Although this kind of meeting was extremely formal, there would basically be no resolution on some particularly sensitive matters. On some sensitive issues, the council meeting seemed more like a discussion and test, which was a precursor. And the plenary meeting referred to the plenary meeting of the council. Not only the 9 council members participated in the meeting, but also all the councillors of Zhongzhou State. Any sensitive issues in Zhongzhou State, such as policies, personnel, or something else, were decided at the plenary meeting. When Dongqing Wudi called Li Tianlan yesterday, they had just finished the council meeting. Now only one night had passed, and the plenary meeting came. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, and his eyes were a little grim. In recent days, the theme of the meeting almost all revolved around the death of Chen Fangqing and the stability and development of the cabinet. To be clear, the theme of the meeting these days was that the Academy, the Prince Group, the Southeast Group, and even the Special Warfare Group, which was too busy to take care of itself, were putting pressure on Li Tianlan and Dongqing Wudi. The North Group continued to remain silent. If everything went well, the North Group would be a part of the new group in the future. But obviously, the impact of Chen Fangqing's death was gradually fermenting, and some people inside the North Group had begun to have some doubts and scruples. Under such circumstances, could it be that this plenary meeting was about to form some sort of resolution? What do you think? Li Tianlan suddenly asked. He would not regard Qin Weibai as a vase who could only warm his bed and please him in bed. No one in the world dared to think so. Although the goddess who stayed with him had completely restrained all her sharpness, no one dared to underestimate her wisdom. Not to mention anything else, she was now the patriarch of the Lin clan, which was enough to explain everything. It's difficult. Qin Weibai had obviously been thinking about this problem. We are very passive now. The only thing we can do is to compromise and make concessions. It's not good for anyone to fight head-on. And if we really fight head-on, we have no chance of winning, no chance at all. Qin Weibai shook her head gently. In the current situation, it's already a victory if we don't lose too many things. I can make concessions, but they are too insatiable. Li Tianlan said expressionlessly. There's no way. Qin Weibai said directly. We can only wait. It's best to do nothing now. Wait. Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. Wait for a variable. Qin Weibai said softly. She looked at Li Tianlan and continued. I've done something secretly, and now I'm almost ready. It was originally a good card, but at the critical moment, we have no choice but to play it first. But it's not the time yet. It's better to hide this card first. If there's a right opportunity, this card can play a great role. What card? Li Tianlan looked at Qin Weibai curiously. It's about the Special Warfare Group, as well as some people and things of other groups. Qin Weibai smiled. It's very sensitive. It's not the right time yet. I need an opportunity. As for now, what we need to do the most is to withstand the pressure and compromise appropriately. They seem to be chasing us relentlessly, but no one really wants to kill us. The current situation seems very bad, but in the end, there's a high chance that we'll still end up with a draw. It's just that how this game of chess is going to end up testing the wisdom of the major groups. The coordinates are Hengshui City, Hebei Province. The temperature these days is more than -80 degrees Celsius. It's such a cold day, and there's a long line of elders to do a nucleic acid test. The open-air line. Do it twice. Chapter 11:10. When the girl in the setting sun put down the brush in her hand and stared at her handwriting in the afterglow, she had a poetic beauty and tenderness. The girl was beautiful, and so was her handwriting. The faint fragrance of ink floated in the study. The girl's eyelashes trembled gently, and she looked serious and focused in the afterglow of the setting sun. What did you write today, miss? The bald, tall, and fierce-looking man asked with a smile when he saw the girl stop writing. Anything. The girl inadvertently reached out and touched her rose petal-like lips. She said with a smile. It doesn't matter what I write when I practice calligraphy. The important thing is to calm down. Uncle Yeyu, come and see what I wrote. The fierce man scratched his bald head and looked a little simple and honest when he smiled. I just haven't graduated from junior high school. Whatever you write is good. As he spoke, he walked over slowly and lowered his head to admire the girl's handwriting. The girl also lowered her head to look at her work. On the white Xian paper, there were names, positions, profiles, and some deeds written in delicate handwriting. The orange-red light of the setting sun shone on the first line of the fine and delicate characters, and it was so clear that it was somewhat shocking. Sun Liye, male, former member of the Parliament of Zhongzhou State, Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, leader of the Prince Group, 76 years old, served as Deputy Governor of Talent Province, Deputy Speaker of Yungue Province, Governor of Dongshan Province, Speaker, and so on. During his tenure as Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, he fought for the interests of the Special Warfare Group many times, intentionally or unintentionally, such as Sun Lu, Deputy Speaker of Dongshan Province, Deputy Governor of Beijiang Province. Number 6 of Phoenix Pavilion, codenamed Snow Shadow, appeared beside Sun Liye 20 years ago, 37 years old now, and constantly influenced Sun Liye's decisions, such as a certain year, month, and day. Now living in building number 7 of Dragon Lake Park in Yuzhou. Number 17 of Phoenix Pavilion, codenamed White Fox, appeared beside Sun Liye 12 years ago, 26 years old now, and cooperated well with Snow Shadow. Now living in building number 7 of Dragon Lake Park in Yuzhou. He Pingon, male, 52 years old, was the governor of Dongshan Province, served as Minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Nanyuan, Deputy Speaker of Southwest City, one after another familiar name, one after another incomparably illustrious figure, and one after another young woman that almost no one knew about. Behind each name was a long list of deeds, and even provided a lot of specific evidence. All the behind-the-scenes transactions were clearly presented on the paper. There were so many of them that it was shocking. In the dense handwriting on the first page of Xian paper in front of the girl, only 2 people were introduced. The girl pondered for many days and secretly investigated for several years. In the end, she only wrote down 7 names. Other than Sun Liye and He Pingon, the former mayor of North City, the current deputy speaker of Yuzhou Province, the current governor of Nanyue Province, and the current secretary general of the cabinet. The last one was the secretary of Nanyuan Province's Governor Chun Shi, Mao Song. Among the 7 of them, Mao Song's position was the lowest, but the current stage was the most sensitive. If all the 7 materials were published, it would be like a nuclear bomb to the entire Zhongzhou state. Its power was enough to destroy the world, and even blow up the entire Kunlun city. Naturally, the Phoenix Pavilion, which had been secretly developing for many years, had more power than this. But there was no need to announce the other powers. The weight of these few people was enough. The existence of the Phoenix Pavilion was not a secret to the 7 people on the list. To the others who were similarly immersed in the gentleness woven by the elites of the Phoenix Pavilion, this was no secret. Following the fall of these 7 people, the others would definitely be in a state of panic. This was the most powerful threat, and also a long knife across their necks. After the 7 people were taken down in an instant, Emperor Dong's palace could continue to use this long knife to make use of those who had not been exposed. Dongshan, Nanyue, North City, the cabinet. The 7 names involved the Prince Group, the North Group, the Academics, and the Southeast Group, which was enough to show how terrifying the tentacles of the Phoenix Pavilion extended. And these places happened to be the key places that Emperor Dong's palace would attack next. The girl was not worried at all that no one would believe these things. These people and these things, the authenticity was almost unquestionable. There was a lot of evidence, and a little investigation could find a lot of problems. When this material was published, it would be sent to the council members as soon as possible. Then the entire Zhongzhou state should be able to hear to that kind of earth-shattering explosion sound. The pressure on Emperor Dong's palace would be greatly relieved. Even if there were still people who would not let go of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan's graduation would no longer be their main target. Judging from the current terrible situation of Emperor Dong's palace, this was indeed a good card that could pull Emperor Dong's palace out of danger. But the girl always felt a little pity. She originally planned to use this powerful trump card to make a perfect cooperation with His Majesty Li Tianlan. She lowered her head and continued to stare at the words on the paper. Beside the girl, the expert at the peak of the thundershocking realm from Kunlun City, was also reading these words seriously. His loyalty to Kunlun City had always been extremely fanatical. But looking at the shocking information on the paper, which was enough to doom Kunlun City eternally, he did not have the slightest change in his expression. All the real handwriting became different when it was projected to his eyes. He just felt that there were a lot of handwriting on the paper, and it seemed that what he saw was not comprehensive. But he did not think much and just smiled. There is no wind or rain, and it looks a little familiar. Uncle Ye, you must know about Mistress Sue's calm disturbance. You are laughing at me again. The girl smiled gently. Her real age was less than 13 years old, but she had an indescribable charm. Yi Yu laughed and then said meaningfully, Miss, this poem is not well written. His Highness may not like it. In this situation, His Highness can't wait for the storm outside. The bigger the storm, the better. The girl named Gu Xianyan's smile faded a little. After thinking for 2 seconds, she asked softly, Still can't get in touch with the teacher? Can't get in touch with him. Yi Yu shook his head helplessly. I haven't heard from him for several days. I don't know where His Highness is. Gu Xianyan nodded thoughtfully and looked at the handwriting on the desk in front of her again. Sister Qin was now ready to play her card, but she had never really done it. She said she would wait for an opportunity. Would this opportunity be the time for Gu Xingyun to appear? After all, it would be such a pity if Gu Xingyun, the protagonist of this drama, was missing. Chapter 11:11. When Dongcheng Wudi and Bai Zhanfang came back, it was nearly 10 o'clock in the evening. Not to mention their gloomy faces, the meeting time was enough to make everyone in the Bai family who really knew the current situation serious. It was another nearly 14-hour meeting. The longer and longer meeting time also showed that Dongcheng Wudi was now under great pressure. Except for them, no one knew how fierce the debate was at today's plenary meeting. There was silence in the smoky study. Zhou Mulan, Dongcheng Wudi, Bai Zhanfang, and Bai Qingzhao were all smoking in silence. Bai Qingqian peeled an apple and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took it subconsciously, shook his head, and put it on the table. Qin Weibai was making tea. 2 screens hung on the other side of the study. The screens were on, and the figures of Zhou Yuanshan and Wu Zhengmin were equally serious and dignified in front of the screens. These people were almost the core team of the giant group and the new group. It was not convenient for Wu Zhengmin to come now. Zhou Yuanshan was far away in Jiangxia and could not come, but he participated in the discussion through the internet. These people were the most intuitive present and future of the giant group and the new group. After next year's election, Zhou Mulan and Bai Zhanfang would retire, and Dongcheng Wudi would continue to be re-elected. At the same time, Bai Qingqian and Bai Qingzhao would enter the Zhongzhou State Parliament, and Wu Zhengmin would serve as a director of Zhongzhou State. Zhou Yuanshan, who was 39 years old this year, would officially establish his position as the leader of the new group in this election. In Li Tianlan and Dongcheng Wudi's vision, they intended to push Zhou Yuanshan directly into the parliament. Considering his age, it was almost impossible for Zhou Yuanshan to become a member of parliament, but he could pass the time as a substitute member. At the same time, he could stabilize Nanyue. 5 years later, he could enter the parliament and even further become a director. This was the biggest disadvantage of the new group now. It was not that there were no people available, but there were no suitable candidates for some high-level positions, which involved qualifications and prestige. Wu Zhengmin was the only candidate who could make everyone speechless. Bai Qingqian also had the qualifications to become a member of parliament. A little lower, there were provincial speakers and governors. Although the people of the new group lacked qualifications, there was no lack of recommendations. As a result, Nanyue was a little difficult. Unless the new group gave up Nanyue, it was necessary to introduce a candidate who could barely enter the parliament. Zhou Yuanshan was the only choice. Although Zhou Yuanshan was too young and barely qualified, his future and ability were reassuring. Coupled with Li Tianlan's strength, it was not impossible for the new group to push him up. However, with Chen Fangqing's death, the variables in everything increased greatly. Not to mention Zhou Yuanshan's position. Even Bai Qingqian's position was being coveted. I'll take a step back. In the long, deathly silence, Wu Zhengmin suddenly smiled and said in a calm voice. For a moment, no one spoke. Qin Weibai paused in making tea. After a few seconds, she looked up and asked, Is the situation so serious? I'm afraid it's more serious than you think. Dongcheng Wudi took a deep drag on his cigarette and sighed softly. What did you discuss in today's meeting? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. Dongqing Wudi flicked the banquet and couldn't help sneering. Obviously, he was extremely dissatisfied with the content of today's meeting. Human affairs. For 14 hours, they talked about human affairs and united against us. Some people talked about several key positions, even Jingmin's position. Do they really think we're at the end of the road? We're not at the end of the road. Wu Zhengmin smiled and said, but it's good to compromise appropriately. I'll step down and Speaker Bai will take over. This is the best solution at present. He looked at Dongqing Wudi and then at Bai Qingqian. His eyes were very deep. Everyone could understand what Wu Zhengmin meant. Wu Zhengmin was already very old. If he continued to serve for another term, when Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang stepped down, he would be the oldest in the Zhongzhou State Parliament, whether it was a member or a director. It was the helpless move of the new group for him to go further. After one term he had to step down anyway. At present several major groups were targeting the new group. Wu Zhengmin stepping down at this time was undoubtedly a super heavyweight bargaining chip, and a huge compromise for the new group. Now no matter how bad the situation of the new group was, no one really wanted to push Li Tianlan. As long as Wu Zhengmin stepped down, the matter would almost come to an end. With Wu Zhengmin's withdrawal, it also meant that the position of the Deputy Prime Minister of the Cabinet, which was quite important among the directors of Zhongzhou State, was vacant. Other groups targeted Wu Zhengmin not because they really wanted this position. A director's position was the key, especially when this position also represented the Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, which was high and powerful. Because everyone wanted this position, but no one was willing to fight for it. If they fought for it, it meant that they would be the first to become chaotic. After all, they were targeting the new group, and they themselves were not monolithic. No one was willing to fight for such a sensitive position. Therefore, even if Wu Zhengmin stepped down, the position of the Deputy Prime Minister was very likely to fall into the hands of the new group. With Bai Qingqian, she could skip the counselor position and directly become the new director of Zhongzhou State. And what the major groups were targeting Wu Zhengmin at this time actually wanted was the original position of counselor that belonged to Bai Qingqian, which ranked third in the cabinet. After the new group lost this position, the plan to attack the cabinet had almost failed, but there was still a chance for a comeback. Nanyue Jiangxia, Dongshan Jiangnan and Xia. With 5 provinces in hand, if it operated properly, the new group would still be the top group in Zhongzhou State, and it could also establish its right to speak in the cabinet to a certain extent. And if it gave up its strong position in the cabinet, the new group could fully help the giant group fight for some other positions while stabilizing its position, which was also the key of the key. The two groups had always had high expectations for this election, and it could be said that they were determined to win several key positions. The battle for the cabinet was one of the focuses. Nanyue was also the focus. In addition, there was a position in the military that everyone was paying attention to but no one had mentioned yet. After the election, even if Dongqing Wudi was re-elected, he would inevitably step down from the position of the commander of the Border Control Corps. This position originally belonged to Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai, but after his resignation, Dongqing Wudi held the position for more than 2 years. The giant group undoubtedly wanted to take back this traditional sphere of influence that belonged to them. What did the commander of the Border Control Corps mean? It was possible. It could be said that he was a super heavyweight in the military, a member of Zhongzhou State, a deputy minister of the army headquarters, a director of the military, and a marshal of hundreds of thousands of troops. It was no exaggeration to say that the final ownership of this position had the most direct relationship with whether Dongqing Wudi's influence on the military was strong or not. If there were no changes within the Wang family of Beihai, the most powerful candidate for this position was the deputy minister of the army headquarters, Yi Dongsheng, who was known as the god of army of Zhongzhou State. If he came forward, the giant group could only give up no matter how unwilling they were. Today, in the whole of Zhongzhou State, no one was more suitable to go to the Border Control Corps than Yi Dongsheng. If Beihai pushed him forward, then the others had nothing to say. But now Yi Dongsheng was fighting for the position of director, and it was impossible for him to go to the Border Control Corps. In this way, the giant group had hoped to fight for it again. The new group still didn't know who the giant group was going to push to fight for that position. Even Li Tianlan didn't know. They only knew that in Dongqing Wudi's mind, this person was almost a candidate who would definitely succeed if he was pushed forward. This also meant that in everyone's mind, that person was the most suitable person to go to the border control corps besides Yi Dongsheng. Li Tianlan had seen the list of generals of the giant group and never felt that anyone had such strong competitiveness. And this position was also closely related to the advance and retreat of the new group. Wu Zhengmin couldn't work for too long. Obviously, he thought that it was a good result to use his retirement as a bargaining chip to calm the storm, and at the same time to fight for more favorable conditions for himself, and to let the new group plan the layout again. And such an outcome meant that the suppression of the new group by the major groups had been effective, and the plan of the new group had been severely thwarted. At the same time, he also gained something. The new group could also fight for other interests if it stabilized itself. In Wu Zhengmin's view, the situation caused by him taking a step back was a draw in the future. No matter how unwilling he was, such a situation was relatively the best. It's not that simple. Zhou Mulin, who was a man of few words, suddenly said, "What does the council think of me?" Li Tianlan suddenly asked. Now everything could be said to be caused by him. Although he didn't do anything, he couldn't come up with evidence to prove his innocence. All the pressure on the new group and the giant group was also because of him. The council's view of him was the key. Dongqing Wudi glanced at him and suddenly smiled. The council still recognizes your ability and future. Wentian proposed to lock you up again for a long time, and Wenjiang voted for it. But it was rejected by the president. It was expected that Guo Wentian wanted to lock him up to stabilize the position of the prince group. And Ji Wenjiang, the tycoon of the southeast group, voted for it. Beihai, Wang Shengxiao, now really felt that his wings had hardened. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and didn't speak. Everyone knew that it was impossible to lock Li Tianlan up again at this time. Since the other party mentioned it, there was no doubt that he wanted to take more things from the new group. Li Tianlan thought in silence. He knew very well that he had to do something again now. The president proposed to make you a special security advisor of Zhongzhou State, on the same level as Gu Xingyun, and a director. What do you think? Dongqing Wudi suddenly asked. Chapter 11-12. Special Security Advisor of Zhongzhou State. In the history of Zhongzhou State, this was not a strange position, but it was also a position that most people had never heard of. The title of the war god of Zhongzhou State was just what the outside world, or to be exact, the dark world called Gu Xingyun. Kunlun City was the hub of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State, but that was not its name to the outside world. The hub of the special warfare system that Zhongzhou State would not disclose to the public, but was recorded was officially called the Special Operations Department of Zhongzhou State. As for Gu Xingyun, he was the 12th minister of the Special Operations Department of Zhongzhou State, and also served as the Special Security Advisor of Zhongzhou State. Those who knew about this kind of part-time job would naturally understand. Moreover, the dark world was originally in a state of darkness. As long as it was not exposed, it naturally did not matter what the outside world called it. However, Li Huaqing's suggestion was to separate Gu Xingyun's two duties. That was to say, in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State in the future, Gu Xingyun would be the Minister of Special Operations Department, and Li Tianlan would serve as the Security Advisor of Special Operations Department. There was no such thing as who was the boss and who was the second. There was a complete balance of power. Li Tianlan also had an official identity, as well as the treatment and corresponding power equal to that of a council giant in Zhongzhou State. To some extent, such a proposal could be regarded as Li Huaqing's appeasement to the new group. When they were suppressing the new group, they naturally did not think of really driving Li Tianlan into a corner and making Wu Zhengmin step down. They took away the position of counselor by Qingqian and some other important positions, and let Li Tianlan enter the decision-making level of the council. This was undoubtedly a kind of balance. It was no exaggeration to say that under normal circumstances, Li Tianlan's treatment could be regarded as a meteoric rise. This kind of advancement wasn't completely unreasonable. After all, Li Tianlan had served as the commander of the Snowdance Corps in the Chaos of Snow Country, which was also a commander-level position, equivalent to that of a member of parliament. Although this position had been removed by the parliament, this experience was also a qualification. Now he had become the special security advisor of Zhongzhou State, and his treatment and status had been further improved. With this qualification and Li Tianlan's own combat capability, others could not say anything. But in this situation, how could Li Tianlan be on the same level as Gu Xingyun? I disagree. Li Tianlan expressed his opinion directly and frankly. His eyes were cold. No one was surprised. Li Tianlan's objection was completely reasonable. Those who could enter this study were very observant about the balance and compromise in all aspects. The moment they heard Dongqing Wudi convey Li Huaqing's proposal, they understood something. Making Li Tianlan the special security advisor of Zhongzhou State was tantamount to giving him the power of a council member of Zhongzhou State. It was indeed a huge promotion which could be said to be a good thing. But Li Huaqing's focus was not on this at all. The point of his proposal was to put Li Tianlan on the same level as Gu Xingyun. The level of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State was a very serious matter. Of course, many aspects would be considered. Li Tianlan's combat capability was stronger than Gu Xingyun's, but it did not mean that he had to lead Gu Xingyun. Li Huaqing proposed that they should be at the same level. Li Tianlan did not agree with Gu Xingyun's combat capability. It was the situation of Gu Xingyun, or the Special Warfare Group. The investigation of the treason case of the Special Warfare Group did not stop even in the case of Chen Fangqing's sudden death. Dongqing Wudi served as the patriarch of the task force, while Yi Dongxing and Qingya, the current minister of the Ministry of Security of Zhongzhou State, were the deputy team leaders. This was a task force jointly established by the Giant Group, the Southeast Group, and the New Group. Perhaps the Southeast Group would do its best to suppress the New Group, but it did not mean that they would not cooperate in other ways. Especially in the face of the Special Warfare Group, the Southeast Group would not be soft-hearted at all. This was a huge handle that could shake the foundation of the entire Special Warfare Group. As long as they seized this handle and continued to investigate, when they suppressed the development of the New Group, it meant that they could get more benefits from the Special Warfare Group. Everyone in the Southeast Group understood this very well. Therefore, the task force investigated day and night, and the inside story had snowballed. The directors of the 4 provincial special operations bureaus of Yuzhou, Northern City, Suzhou, and Nanyun were now all under investigation. One of them could be said to be Gu Xingyun's most trusted confidant. Everyone knew what this meant. Gu Xingyun was caught in the storm, and his ally, the Prince Group, who was most likely to give him firepower support, was now in a terrible situation. In the face of more and more evidence, the Special Warfare Group was doomed to fall apart. Even if Gu Xingyun could barely escape with his own combat capability, the Special Warfare Group could not continue to exist. That was what everyone thought. Until Li Huaqing proposed that Li Tianlan and Gu Xingyun should be at the same level. This suggestion really had some hidden meaning. There was no doubt that letting Li Tianlan become the special security advisor of Zhongzhou State was indeed a comfort to the new group, but the more important meaning behind this proposal was to protect Gu Xingyun. Li Tianlan and Gu Xingyun should be at the same level. This was undoubtedly a hint that the treason case of the Special Warfare Group should come to an end here. As Li Tianlan entered the parliament, the special warfare system was bound to undergo a big reshuffle. The elites of the Li family were in contact with the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State again, after more than 20 years. Gu Xingyun was bound to be cautious and did not dare to make any mistakes. In this way, even if he had really done something outrageous, he did not dare to continue to do it now, especially when he was no match for Li Tianlan. He could only behave himself. After all, Gu Xingyun was also an expert who was close to the peak of the invincible realm. Perhaps after realizing the extreme strength and presumptuousness of his personal strength, Li Huaqing's suspicion of Li Tianlan did not disappear, so he thought of using Gu Xingyun to check and balance Li Tianlan. This was not a good choice, but it was the only choice. Of course, there were better ways, such as transferring Wang Shengxiao to take over Gu Xingyun's position. But in this way, not to mention the backlash within the Special Warfare Group, the Southeast Group and the New Group were not fools. Who would be fooled by such an obvious provocation? Such a proposal could not be passed at all. In order to protect Gu Xingyun, the Prince Group, which also needed an ally, would definitely support it. The North Group, which already had doubts, would only choose to be neutral. The Southeast Group was also happy to see Gu Xingyun involve Li Tianlan's angle, but it would not make a clear statement. In this way, the probability of passing was very high. Once this proposal was passed, it meant that Chen Fangqing's death and the case of treason of the Special Warfare Group were completely over. The rest were just some trivial aftermath. The Special Warfare Group would naturally reunite with the Prince Group when it regained its footing. Chen Fangqing had been in the cabinet for many years. His death was originally a touch of sadness. Coupled with his deep-rooted management, the Prince Group had been able to stabilize the situation with the strong support of the Special Warfare Group. Now that the new group had lost the initiative, it was no longer advisable to cut a piece of meat off the Prince Group. Similarly, their plan to conquer the cabinet would also be completely ruined and doomed to failure. But the new group did not gain nothing. Li Tianlan entering the parliament and becoming an invisible director could also be regarded as the expansion of the new group's sphere of influence. This was also the result that Li Huaqing wanted. He hoped that the new group could rise and make its voice heard in different fields, but he absolutely did not want it to be too tough in one field, such as the cabinet. The new group had no choice but to accept such an outcome. This is unacceptable. The Prince Group, which has stabilized its position, has an ally, and it is not difficult to stabilize the interior. Li Huaqing is also willing to let the Prince Group have one more director to cooperate with Guo Wentian. The decline of their influence is inevitable, but the appointment of the new director is certain after Li Huaqing's promise. This was already a great harvest. Such a situation was also Guo Wentian's dream. Anbai Qingqian entered the cabinet and replaced Wu Zhengmin. The position of counselor left by her was the goal of the Southeast Group. The Prince Group wanted the position of the new director, the Giant Group wanted to protect the new group, and the new group wanted to stabilize itself. No one would compete with the Southeast Group. Li Huaqing was also ready to unite most of the forces to promote Hua Zhenyang as the prime minister. So the Southeast Group would get the position of the counselor as it wished. And the academics also achieved their set goals. Li Huaqing was re-elected, and Hua Zhenyang was the prime minister. In the next 5 years, the academics would be completely strong. It was already a great harvest for the Special Warfare Group to be able to stabilize its position. Naturally, it would not ask for too much. And the deal between the North Group and the new group would not let each other down. In this way, the situation between the six would be completely obvious. The new group, the Special Warfare Group, and the Prince Group were all losers, but they also gained something. The Giant Group and the North Group did not lose or win, but they also got what they needed. As the victors, the academics and the Southeast Group had their gains, but at the same time they had to pay. The most important thing was that after this, the entire Zhongzhou state would become stable. Stability was always the overriding factor. Victory and failure, balance and compromise, every move of the major groups was between advance and retreat. No one left dismally. After reaching a situation that everyone could accept, the stability would continue. They never tried to destroy any strong group, but they could freely advance and retreat. This was the key to Li Huaqing's success today, and it was also the style of the academics. Now it seemed that it was undoubtedly very clever. Countless thoughts were running in Li Tianlan's mind, and he suddenly said, "What's the result?" "No result." Zhou Mulin suddenly smiled. "The pressure is great, but I can still stand it for the time being." But he shook his head and did not continue. Li Tianlan already understood what he meant. If there was no hope of a comeback, then this result was the best result. Li Huaqing protected Gu Xingyun. Although they were somewhat unwilling, they could only accept it for the time being. After all, it was not a bad thing for them that Li Tianlan entered the parliament. Moreover, the difference in combat strength between Li Tianlan and Gu Xingyun was extremely obvious. But in the environment of the special warfare system, Li Tianlan's strength would not be shaken at all because of his shallow foundation. The initiative was already on Li Tianlan's side. Li Tianlan was also very clear why there was no result at this plenary meeting. The only explanation was that although Dongqing Wudi and the others resisted the pressure to express their opposition, such opposition would obviously not be too firm. This also meant that they had the possibility of agreeing, but the details still needed to be discussed. Otherwise, today was a plenary meeting, and Li Huaqing could use a vote to force his proposal. It did not come to this step, naturally, because of Dongqing Wudi's attitude, so there was a possibility of compromise. Li Tianlan lowered his head slightly and narrowed his eyes. Perhaps now in the heart of the leader of the giant group, he was already thinking about how to make himself more powerful in the special warfare system. Chapter 11-13. Let's wait a little longer. Li Tianlan was silent for about 4 or 5 minutes before he leaned back on the sofa and said softly. Dongqing Wudi nodded and said, Li Huaqing didn't force his proposal through at the plenary meeting today, because Dongqing Wudi and others didn't refuse firmly. This left room for further discussion. Similarly, no matter how firm the opposition was, it was still an opposition. This also left time for discussion with Li Tianlan. The next result could be discussed later. There was less than a year before the election. Time was tight, but there was still some spare time. You have to make up your own mind about this matter. Think it over. Dongqing Wudi lit another cigarette and said with a smile. The president has time to wait. He didn't continue. Li Tianlan nodded silently. The current situation was undoubtedly extremely unfavorable for the new group. Everyone was under great pressure. Li Huaqing wanted to calm down the storm, and gave a relatively acceptable result. The Xian group could consider or even refuse, but the longer this decision was delayed, the more variables there would be, and the more losses there would be. After all, while the Xian group was considering, the other groups would not just sit still and do nothing. When it was time to suppress the Xian group, they would definitely go all out. This time was almost regarded as the last time the Xian group could suck the Xian group's blood before they compromised. Li Tianlan picked up the teacup, took a sip of tea, and looked at Wu Zhengmin on the screen. As if noticing his gaze, Wu Zhengmin nodded with a smile. This old man who had truly sacrificed everything for the Li family had long felt exhausted. Now that he had retired, he had nothing to be unwilling about. Even he himself thought that this was the best result. Li Tianlan slowly leaned back on the sofa and stopped talking, as if he was meditating. Dongqing Wudi began to talk about several sensitive positions in the military. Li Tianlan didn't speak, just quietly listening to their conversation. The moment he closed his eyes, his perspective had begun to shift in another direction. The Qin family was filled with a mournful atmosphere. Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi died on the same day, so their funerals were naturally on the same day. Although it had been less than a week since their funerals, the Qin family had obviously become deserted. Even most of the Qin family's relatives had left Yuzhou. If Li Tianlan really accepted Li Huaqing's proposal, there was no doubt that after the major groups reached a new balance, the Qin family's experience would soon be completely forgotten. As Qin Shi's secretary, Mao Song still hadn't left the Qin family's compound. Qin Fangqing's death had earned the whole Qin family a lot of sympathy. While the hard-pressed prince group suppressed the new group, it also hoped to unite the Qin family for more support. Qin Fangqing did make a series of inappropriate decisions before his death, but his contribution to Zhongzhou state couldn't be erased. Not only in the prince group, but even the senior officials of other groups respected Qin Fangqing very much. At this time, uniting the Qin family would undoubtedly put more pressure on the new group. People close to the Qin family would be further promoted. It was said that Qin Fangqing's secretary, Yuan Lin, would soon serve as the governor of a province. The Ministry of Personnel also talked to Mao Song. It was said that he would soon be appointed as the Secretary General of a province. The Qin family was not very prosperous. Except for Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi, most of the others were developing in the economic field and state-owned enterprises. These people would also be taken care of to varying degrees. But as the storm of Qin Fangqing and Qin Shi's death subsided, the Qin family's biggest reliance in the future was undoubtedly the two secretaries, Yuan Lin, who was the governor, and Mao Song, who was the deputy governor. So the Qin family was now trying to win over these two secretaries. No matter what Mao Song and Yuan Lin thought now, they couldn't really leave the Qin family alone. So the two of them had been living in the small courtyard arranged for them by the Chen family during this time, dealing with Chen Fangqing and Chen Shi's funeral. At the same time, they were also waiting for the new appointment notice. Mao Song's performance had always been normal. The so-called normal was not panic, not excitement, and had always maintained a rigorous and serious attitude to deal with all kinds of affairs and deal with all kinds of people. After dinner, Mao Song shut himself in the study. This used to be Chen Shi's study, but now it was Mao Song's office. It could be seen that the Chen family valued and wanted to win him over. He was now studying several documents about Nanyuan province. There were many rumors about his and Yuan Lin's promotion in the outside world. It seemed to have been settled, but in fact there were also disputes. As Chen Fangqing's secretary, Yuan Lin's rank was the governor. His position was also the most controversial. Many of the higher-ups were inclined to let Yuan Lin be the governor of a province in the northwest. Under normal circumstances, Yuan Lin could be said to have such an outcome. Everyone knew the current situation of the prince group. If Chen Fangqing stepped down under the pressure, there was basically no hope for the governor of Yuan Lin. Most likely, he would be given an idle position to retire, which was a relatively good outcome. But now, Chen Fangqing's abnormal death became a ladder for Yuan Lin's promotion. Coming out of Chen Fangqing's influence, he was still a capable person of the prince group. Naturally, the prince group wanted to take this opportunity to push him to a more prominent position. Therefore, the prince group was now inclined to transfer Yuan Lin to be the speaker of the province in the northwest. The speaker of a province and the governor seemed to have the same rank, but in the eyes of the higher-ups, they had completely different weights. Yuan Lin himself was the governor, and his seniority was enough. Even if Yuan Lin could not be the speaker of a province, the position of the governor of a remote province was not something the prince group could be satisfied with. Therefore, if it was determined that he could not win the position of the speaker of a province, Yuan Lin would naturally be appointed to a more important position at the level of the governor. In Zhongzhou State, it was not easy to find a position more valuable than that of the governor, but not the speaker. Several heavyweight departments in Zhongzhou State had always been contested by militarists, so it was hard for the prince group to arrange for them. As for departments like the Ministry of Personnel, they were all members of parliament. Yuan Lin was not qualified. Therefore, the prince group was now focusing on fighting for two positions. The first was the mayor of Yuzhou. The second was the mayor of Huating. The current speaker of Huating was one of the leaders of the prince group, so it was unlikely that Yuan Lin would go there. In Yuzhou, with Bai Zhanfang's retirement next year, there was bound to be a reshuffle in the Yuzhou parliament. Yuan Lin undoubtedly had a great chance. This was also the result that the Chens wanted to see. If Yuan Lin became the mayor of Yuzhou, it would be easier for him to take care of the Chens. This was also what Mao Song wanted to see. Because Yuan Lin could not win the position of the speaker of a province, the higher-ups would inevitably make compensation in other aspects. Chen Fangqing's secretary was demoted, and Chen Shi's secretary was promoted. This was a matter of course. In such a situation, Mao Song's new position might not be the secretary general of a province, but the director of Nanyuan province, the deputy governor. With Chen Shi's death, Mao Song could be regarded as having a meteoric rise. This result was basically a foregone conclusion, because Mao Song had received some promises about Yuan Lin and his appointment. Some forces that no one had expected would do something, and finally achieve the current result. Therefore, Mao Song was now very concerned about some documents in Nanyuan. It could even be said that he had entered the state of deputy governor in advance. When there was a knock on the door, it was nearly 12 o'clock in the middle of the night. It was quiet inside the Chen's compound, and everyone had fallen asleep. Listening to the rhythmic knock on the door, Mao Song showed a faint playful smile at the corner of his mouth, and said lightly, "Come in." The door was gently pushed open, and a young woman with a slim figure wearing a black coat with her hair in a bun came in. The young woman was about 25 or 26 years old. If it wasn't for her unique charm, no one would even be able to tell that she was married. She was extremely beautiful, but she had a kind of unapproachable temperament. Furthermore, she was not reserved, so she appeared extremely arrogant and undisciplined. She looked very cold. She placed the document in her hand in front of Mao Song. Her cold temperament suddenly disappeared when she opened her mouth. Her voice also became somewhat soft. "Brother Mao, this is the document you wanted." Mao Song opened the folder casually. The folder was empty. Mao Song smiled softly. The young woman's name was Chen Yao, and she could be considered as Chen Fengqing's granddaughter. Although she was not the direct granddaughter, they were very close. Chen Yao's biological grandfather was Chen Fengqing's biological elder brother. With such a relationship, Chen Yao was naturally one of the core members of the Chen family. Mao Song had seen Chen Yao a few times before, and his impression of her was that of a very proud and reserved little woman. He heard that she got married at the beginning of last year, and was extremely strong at home. He himself was also a senior executive of a large company, so he did have the right to be proud. "Can this document satisfy me?" Mao Song knocked on the empty folder with a pen, and his voice was low. Chen Yao gently bit her pink lips. Under the light, her red lips glowed with an extremely soft luster, and looked incomparably sexy. "It's all done according to your request." With a little embarrassment and shame, as well as a touch of charm and welcome, Chen Yao said in a low voice. Mao Song pulled Chen Yao into his arms. There was a touch of struggle and hesitation in Chen Yao's eyes, and then it turned into helplessness, looking delicate and pitiful. Mao Song unhurriedly took off Chen Yao's coat. His breathing began to gradually quicken. Under the coat was a piece of snow-white smooth, silver high heels, black stockings. Other than that, there was nothing else. Not bad. Mao Song smiled very comfortably. Chen Yao, who was trembling all over, lowered her head, and became more and more embarrassed. "Kneel down, I'll give you a facial mask." Mao Song smiled and pressed Chen Shishua down. Her fair and tender shoulders slowly pressed her into the desk with incomparable toughness. A few seconds later, a pair of small trembling hands moved slightly along his legs. Mao Song continued to look at the document. 2 minutes later, that familiar and exciting feeling of comfort took over his brain. Mao Song leaned on the chair and smiled faintly. The Chen family is really a talent. Or is it that the more cold and aloof a woman is, the more coquettish she is? When I saw you before, I really didn't expect that there would be a day like this. Mao Song really didn't expect it. On the second night after Chen Fengqing and Chen Shi's funeral, Chen Yao appeared in Mao Song's room. Although her performance was very embarrassing and shameful, she didn't hide what she did. It was seduction. This was undoubtedly to find a new backer after Chen Fengqing and Chen Shi's death. He didn't know what Chen Shi's inner thoughts were. Maybe she felt guilty or something else, but under that extreme stimulation, he almost didn't hesitate to accept Chen Yao, who was extremely strong at home but was extremely obedient by his side. The gentle movements under the desk paused. Chen Yao seemed to raise her head. Her voice became softer and softer, but still had a sense of reservation. That voice was low, but in Mao Song's ears it was like thunder. "I just saw Aunt Morong enter Secretary Yuan's room, wearing makeup and sexy clothes." At this time Aunt Morong, Yuan Lin very sexy. Mao Song's mind was dizzy. Astonishment, anger, jealousy, all kinds of emotions suddenly surged up. He directly pulled Chen Yao up. He gritted his teeth and said, "Which Aunt Morong?" Chen Yao's red lips became softer and softer. She whispered, "There's only one Aunt Morong, Morong Xiao." Mao Song didn't speak for a long time. Of course, he knew that there was only one Aunt Morong. She had always been his sister-in-law in his heart. A beautiful, reserved, mature, dignified, gentle, virtuous, and elegant woman. It wasn't that Mao Song didn't have any other thoughts, but he didn't dare to have any other thoughts. Because that was Chen Shi's wife. And now Chen Shi's wife, wearing sexy clothes, was in Yuan Lin's room. What was she doing? What was she doing? Chen Shi's bones were not cold yet. Slap. Mao Song slapped Chen Yao's but fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said, "You bunch of bitches." Amidst Chen Yao's low exclamation, Mao Song directly picked her up and threw her on the bed in the lounge. Her hysterical venting didn't cause any waves in the Chen family's courtyard. It wasn't until nearly 3 o'clock in the middle of the night that Chen Yao put on her coat again and sneaked out. Mao Song laid on the bed, thinking about random things in the lounge full of ambiguous smell. He thought about Chen Yao for a while, then thought about Morong Xiao. He thought about her appearance in Yuan Lin's room at this time. He thought about her usual dignified and gentle appearance. He thought about Chunxi again. Sometimes he gritted his teeth, sometimes he sighed softly. He gradually fell asleep in a daze. In the dark lounge, a shadow that had witnessed everything slowly moved and finally came to Mao Song's bed. The shadow was vague, as if it didn't exist, but from a distance, a gaze was always watching here. Mao Song turned over in bed uneasily. His brows gradually wrinkled, and his breathing began to become rapid. In the chaotic dream, Chen Yao became Murong Xiao. The woman he once dreamed of seemed to have lost all elegance and reserve, leaving only rich and intoxicating gentleness and charm. She obediently knelt in front of his door. Bang! In the dream, the sound of the door breaking sounded. Chunxi stood outside the door with a twisted expression, staring at him. A Chunxi covered in blood from head to toe. Chunxi rushed over directly and firmly choked his neck. No. Mao Song suddenly woke up from the dream with a scream. His body curled into a ball, and he kept muttering to himself, "I didn't kill you, I didn't kill you. Governor, let me go. I didn't kill you." The gaze that had been cast on Mao Song was withdrawn. The vague shadow in the lounge rushed out of the Chen family's courtyard in an instant, and turned into a black windbreaker. The windbreaker was completely unfolded. A meteor suddenly crossed the sky over the Chen family's courtyard. The next second, the windbreaker appeared inside the Bai family's manor and automatically hung on the hanger. In the bedroom, Li Tianlan gently hugged Qin Weibai, played with her hair, and smiled slightly. The breakthrough was found, and it was an unimaginably good breakthrough. Chapter 11-14. Except for a few people involved and Li Tianlan, no one else knew the absurd scenes that happened in the Chen family's courtyard. The rich amount of information made all kinds of ideas spin rapidly in Li Tianlan's mind. Chen Yao Murong Xiao. Mao Song Yuan Lin. This was undoubtedly the best breakthrough and the variable that the whole Emperor Dong's palace had been dreaming of. It was not difficult to control Mao Song now. What surprised Li Tianlan the most was Murong Xiao. He had seen this distinguished madam of the Chen family on the first day of Chen Fengqing's death. She was less than 40 years old, mature and bright. She was indeed a rare beauty. If he had not seen it with his own eyes, he would not have imagined that this lady, who looked extremely dignified and reserved, could be more open than Chen Yao and Mao Song. If he had not heard it from her, he would not have thought that Chen Shi, who looked tall and strong, was not manly at all. It was easy to understand why Murong Xiao seduced Yuan Lin. Under normal circumstances, the identity of Madame Chen could indeed make her rich for the rest of her life. But this so-called normal circumstances had an important premise. The Chen family could continue to exist. This was obviously impossible. Li Tianlan was not so generous. Everyone knew this. Being Yuan Lin's mistress did not sound good, but as long as she left the Chen family, at least she could continue to live. Li Tianlan shook his head subconsciously. His heart was still surging with joy. He had decided to take advantage of this opportunity. It was Mao Song who killed Chen Shi. There was no doubt about this. Mao Song's behavior in his dream was enough to explain the problem. The clue given by Xianyuan Wushang also pointed to Mao Song. Li Tianlan did not know how Xianyuan Wushang found Mao Song, but he had an almost instinctive trust in Xianyuan Wushang. As soon as Xianyuan Wushang gave the news, Li Tianlan directly sent out Ruthless, who had just inexplicably recovered some energy. Ruthless sword intent was connected with his sword energy. Under the situation that they shared the same vision, Li Tianlan, who had been watching the Chen family's courtyard for a day, finally saw the explosive content he wanted to see. Chen Shi's death was confirmed. And the cause of Chen Fengqing's death was still inexplicable. But it was not important. What was important was that Yuan Lin was Chen Fengqing's secretary, and this secretary had slept with Chen Fengqing's daughter-in-law. As for the others, there was no need to mention them. This news alone was enough to completely reverse the current situation of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan instinctively wanted to get up and communicate with Dongqing Wudi about what he had learned. He knew himself very well. In terms of individual combat capability, no one in the whole dark world was his match now, and he could make some decisions from a very high position. But in any case, he could only be regarded as a newcomer in the high level of Zhongzhou state. It was inevitable that there would be things that he didn't consider thoroughly. At this time, he needed to rely on the wisdom of some old people to make himself mature in this aspect quickly. However, at this time, after a moment of hesitation, Li Tianlan lay back down. He didn't tell Dongqing Wudi about Mao Song before, because he couldn't explain the source of the information. He didn't know this himself. Monitoring Mao Song was his trust in Xianyuan Wushang. Now that he had made a major discovery, there was no need to explain the source of the information. A faintly discernible sword intent slowly bloomed from Li Tianlan's fingertips, matching with Heartless. Lian, Heartless hanging on the hanger, disappeared in the Bai family's manor. The next second, the black trench coat kept splitting into shadows in the Chen family's courtyard, almost covering the entire courtyard in an instant. From now on, everyone in the Chen family was in Li Tianlan's sight. And the only thing he needed to do was to wait for an opportunity. An opportunity for Chen Yao and Morong Xiu to climb into Mao Song's and Yuan Lin's beds respectively. Li Tianlan's body relaxed slightly, and his arm around Qin Weibai slightly tightened. Qin Weibai, who was sleeping soundly in his arms, obediently turned over with the slight strength and buried her face in his arms. A delicate fragrance floated. Li Tianlan closed his eyes, relaxed his spirit, and gradually became in a trance. Late nights in the village were far more lively than at night. Within a few days of coming to the village, Li Guangtu had to change his schedule. He slept during the day and went out at night. Otherwise, he could hardly rest at night. On one side of the village, Gu Xingyun's aura had become more and more obvious. The aura had been increasing from beginning to end. In just a few days, it had entered the real threshold of the peak of the invincible realm. And it was still growing. Now it was close to the peak of the invincible realm. That was the level before he, Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, and others broke through. According to Jiang Shangyu, when Gu Xingyun reached that level, everything should stop. Whether he could break through from the invincible realm to the level they were at now depended on himself in a short time. Li Guangtu's purpose here was very simple. At Jiang Shangyu's invitation, he came here to protect Gu Xingyun. This is only the surface of things. Jiang Shangyu's real purpose might be to show sincerity, or it might also be a deterrent. He saw a lot of things in this base, especially the villagers here. Their extraordinary physical fitness meant too many possibilities. Protect? It was almost impossible for Gu Xingyun to encounter any variables here. In fact, the strength of these people in the village was what Jiang Shangyu wanted to show Li Guangtu the most. Li Guangtu didn't want to admit it, but he had to admit that in a few days he had gradually lost some of his detached mentality. He had never looked down on Jiang Shangyu. The phrase "the younger generation will surpass the older" was used to the extreme by Jiang Shangyu, but it didn't mean that Li Guangtu really thought that Jiang Shangyu could be on an equal footing with him. The Jiang family was alone. Even with Moraid and Knights Templars, they still had no advantage in front of the purgatory of Heaven Capital. Therefore, Li Guangtu had always thought that the cooperation between them was dominated by the purgatory of Heaven Capital. This was a very normal thing to do. But after seeing this village and these villagers, his idea was almost completely subverted. Jiang Shangyu's position in his heart suddenly rose a lot. Li Guangtu finally realized the strength of this alliance, and he knew that he had to give Jiang Shangyu enough respect when necessary. Jiang Shangyu had been sitting on the grass outside the village. He rarely entered the village, and he didn't even eat much. Li Guangtu only saw him occasionally eating a piece of grass pulled from the ground. He just sat there quietly, as if he was thinking about something. The village was lively and noisy in the middle of the night. Almost all the villagers went out of their homes. There was no light in the village. In the pitch-black darkness, everyone was enthusiastically exchanging some trivial matters with each other. Li Guangtu walked out of the village and turned to look at the villagers again. The layout of the village was narrow, and it was especially dark at night. Standing a little further away, even with his eyesight, he couldn't see the villagers clearly. But these villagers didn't seem to be affected at all. Every time he saw this, Li Guangtu always felt a little uncomfortable. He couldn't tell what was going on, but in this village, which was lively at night but cold and silent during the day, he always felt uneasy and anxious for no reason. Taking a deep look at the villagers, Li Guangtu shook his head and found Jiang Shangyu in a familiar place. Jiang Shangyu ate the grass in his hand bit by bit, thinking silently. What are you thinking about? Li Guangtu sat down beside him. I don't know. Jiang Shangyu's voice was calm and rational. You don't know? Li Guangtu smiled. I'm telling the truth. Jiang Shangyu looked at him seriously and said, I always feel that I've overlooked something very important, but I don't know what I've overlooked. It's like I should have been prepared for something, but I suddenly ignored it because I was busy with other things. Li Guangtu looked at him and didn't make any comment. He just said slowly, Gu Xingyun's breakthrough is very smooth. We should be able to go back after dawn. In this place, the longer we stay here, the greater the risk of exposure. If we go back earlier, we may be able to catch up with the good show in Yuzhou. Yes. Jiang Shangyu's eyes became a little dazed again, and it was obvious that he was lost in thought again. He instinctively echoed Li Guangtu. The good show in Yuzhou should come to a critical moment. Li Guangtu narrowed his eyes slightly, and was silent for a moment. Then he suddenly asked, You said that you sent someone to test the two newcomers who appeared next to Li Tianlan? What happened? Silence. A second later, Jiang Shangyu suddenly jumped up from where he was. He stared at Li Guangtu, and his eyes kept changing. Li Guangtu was shocked, but he remained calm on the surface. He just looked at Jiang Shangyu quietly and asked, There was an accident in the result of the test? Jiang Shangyu looked at Li Guangtu in silence. He was silent for a long time, and then laughed hoarsely. I don't know. What do you mean? Li Guangtu frowned. Jiang Shangyu's smile was a little gloomy, a little enlightened, and a little helpless. He looked at Li Guangtu and said seriously, Your Highness, if I tell you that I forgot about it, would you believe it? In fact, it didn't matter whether Li Guangtu believed it or not. What mattered was that it was true. If Li Guangtu hadn't reminded him, he didn't even know how long he would have been thinking. There were some things that he didn't ignore. He completely forgot about it. He had completely forgotten that he had sent someone to probe Xianyuan Wushang. If no one had reminded him, he might not have remembered it at all. From a certain point of view, it was also a kind of deception. This was undoubtedly an extremely abnormal thing. Jiang Shangyu took out his mobile phone and began to dial. When he dialed, he murmured softly, I'm afraid things are going to be troublesome. That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.